My wife looked me dead in the eye across our mahogany kitchen table and told me I was banned from my own property for Christmas because I was difficult. I simply sipped my black coffee and said nothing. She thought her silence had won the argument. She thought I was just an old man accepting his defeat. But at exactly 12:12 a.m. on Christmas morning, my phone rang. It was my son Tyson screaming so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. "Dad, the FBI is at the door and your name is on the news app. What the hell did you do?" I replied with the calmness of a man who spent 40 years managing global supply chain risks. "I didn't do anything, son. I just balanced the books. But before I tell you about the flashing lights and the handcuffs, let me tell you how a $50,000 check started a war. If you have ever been treated like an ATM by the people who are supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Langston Hayes. I am 68 years old. For 3 decades, I served as the vice president of logistics for a transnational shipping conglomerate. My job was to find inefficiencies and eliminate them. My job was to detect fraud before the auditors did. I retired 2 years ago to enjoy the fruits of my labor, but I never stopped watching the numbers. It was December 23rd. The morning light was hitting the frost on the windows of our estate in quiet upstate New York. My wife Beatrice placed her coffee cup down with a sharp clink that sounded like a judge's gavel. She refused to look at me. She smoothed the fabric of her silk robe, a robe I bought her in Paris, and delivered the sentence. "Langston, we have discussed it as a family. It is best if you do not come to the cottage this Christmas." The cottage was a misnomer. It was a 6-bedroom lakefront property on the border of New York and Canada that I had purchased with my performance bonuses in the 90s. It was my sanctuary. Now my wife was telling me I was trespassing. I looked at her. I looked at my son Tyson, who was 32 years old and currently staring intently at his scrambled eggs as if they held the secrets of the universe. He could not meet my gaze. And then I looked at Courtney, my daughter-in-law. She was 29, white, and possessed the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was buttering a piece of toast with a precision that bordered on surgical. Why, I asked. My voice was steady. I did not raise it. I learned a long time ago that the person who shouts loses leverage. Courtney answered before Beatrice could. She looked up, offering me a sad, practiced pout. "Oh, Dad, it is not that we do not want you there. It is just that you have been so stressed lately. You make the children nervous. You create tension. We just want a few days to heal. We want a healing Christmas. Heal." That was the word of the year. My son had not worked a real job in 4 years, yet he needed to heal. Courtney spent her days managing a nonprofit that seemed to have zero impact but very high overhead expenses, yet she needed to heal. Beatrice finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold. "You have been difficult, Langston. Last week was embarrassing. You made Tyson feel small. You made Courtney cry. We cannot have that negative energy around the investors, the friends we invited for dinner." She slipped up. She said investors, but I let it slide. I knew exactly what she was referring to. She was referring to the incident with the check. Let me take you back 7 days. That was the real reason I was being exiled from my own holiday. It was a Tuesday evening. Tyson and Courtney had come over for dinner. We were sitting in the living room. I was drinking a Scotch neat. Courtney had pulled out her tablet and started a presentation. She always had a presentation. She was pitching me on her latest venture, something she called the Bright Future Foundation. "Dad," she had said, her eyes gleaming with avarice, disguised as charity, "we have a massive opportunity. There is a gala in Manhattan next month. It is a networking gold mine. If Tyson and I can get a platinum table, we can secure donors for the entire year. We just need the seed money for the table and the branding package." How much, I had asked. $50,000, she said. I did not blink. $50,000 was a significant amount of money, but not impossible. However, I am a man of logistics. I look for the return on investment. "Show me the prospectus," I said. "Show me the previous year's tax filings for the foundation. Show me where the money goes." The room had gone silent. Tyson shifted in his seat. "Dad, come on. It is charity." "You do not audit charity." "I audit everything, Tyson. That is how I paid for your college degree that you are not using." Courtney's smile faltered. "We are still filing the paperwork for last year. Our accountant is slow. But we need this check now, Dad. The deadline for the gala is tomorrow. If we miss this, we miss the chance to help thousands of underprivileged youth." I looked at her. I saw the designer bag sitting at her feet. I saw the new SUV parked in my driveway. I saw the way my wife Beatrice was nodding along, enamored by the idea of her son being a philanthropist. I stood up and walked to my desk. I pulled out my checkbook. I saw the relief wash over them. They thought they had won. I wrote a check. I tore it out and handed it to Courtney. She looked at it and her face went pale. It was for $500. "What is this?" she whispered. "That is a donation," I said. "When you show me audited financials, we can discuss capital investments. Until then, $50,000 for a party is not charity. It is vanity." Courtney had burst into tears. Tyson had thrown his glass into the fireplace, shattering it. Beatrice had screamed that I was a miser who hated his own family. They stormed out. That was the incident. That was why I was difficult. Back in the kitchen on the morning of December 23rd, I looked at the three of them. They were united against the wallet. They viewed me not as a father or a husband, but as a malfunction in their cash flow. So that is the decision I asked. I am not welcome in my own house. Beatrice stood up. "It is for the best, Langston. Just stay here. Rest. Watch some football. We will bring you back a plate of leftovers." Leftovers. After 40 years of marriage, after I built the portfolio that allowed her to wear those diamonds, she was offering me leftovers. I looked at Tyson. He was still staring at his eggs. "Son, do you agree with this?" he mumbled, barely opening his mouth. "Courtney is really stressed, Dad. It is just 1 year. Don't make a scene." I nodded, slowly, deliberately. "Very well," I said. "I will not come. I hope you find the healing you are looking for." Courtney beamed. It was a victory smile. "Thank you for understanding, Dad. We will FaceTime you on Christmas morning." They finished their breakfast in a rush. The energy in the room shifted. They were excited. They were like children who had successfully tricked the teacher. They packed the car. They loaded cases of expensive wine, gourmet food, and gifts that I knew I had indirectly paid for. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away. Beatrice was in the passenger seat checking her makeup in the mirror. Tyson was driving. Courtney was in the back, already on her phone, likely coordinating the invasion of my property. They turned the corner and disappeared down the long driveway. The silence of the empty house settled around me. It should have been lonely. It should have been heartbreaking. A man of 68 abandoned by his kin during the holidays. But I did not feel sad. I felt cold. I felt precise. I felt the way I used to feel before a hostile takeover meeting. I walked back inside. I locked the front door. I went to my study and sat in my leather chair. I looked at the family portrait on the desk. I placed it face down. Then I picked up the phone. I did not call a friend to complain. I did not call a therapist. I dialed the private client services number for my bank. I waited for the verification prompts. I entered my security codes. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," the operator said. "How can we assist you today?" I swiveled my chair to look out the window at the gray sky. "Good morning," I said. "I need to make a security adjustment to my account. I need you to place an immediate freeze on the supplementary credit card issued to Beatrice Hayes." There was a brief pause. "Certainly, sir." "Is the card lost or stolen?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Neither," I said. "I have reason to believe the spending on that card is no longer authorized by the primary account holder. Block it. Decline everything. Starting now." "Done," the operator said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Do the same for the emergency cards held by Tyson Hayes, and flag any transaction attempting to go through as potential fraud. I want their wallets to be as empty as this house." "Thank you, sir." "It is taken care of." I hung up the phone. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could imagine them on the highway driving north toward the Canadian border, laughing, thinking the old man was defeated. They thought they had cut me off. They did not realize I had just cut the fuel line to their engine. This was not just about a Christmas snub. This was about respect. And as I sat there in the silence, I realized this was just the first move. I turned to my computer. I opened the application that controlled the security systems for the cottage. I saw the live feed. The house was empty, waiting for them. But I also saw the logs. Someone had accessed the property yesterday. A cleaning crew, a catering crew. I zoomed in on the driveway camera footage from the previous day. I saw trucks unloading equipment, sound systems, lighting rigs, cases of liquor that were not for a quiet family gathering. Then I saw Courtney in the footage directing the workers. I turned up the volume on the recorded clip. "Make sure the champagne tower is in the main foyer," she was saying to a workman. "We need to impress these people. Once they sign the checks, we can buy this place from the old man for pennies on the dollar. He won't even know what hit him." I froze. I replayed the audio. Buy this place for pennies on the dollar. This wasn't just a party. This wasn't just about me being difficult. This was a liquidation event. They were using my home to host a fundraiser for their scam foundation, and they were planning to use the proceeds to manipulate me out of my assets. I sat in the silence of my empty house, and I felt a smile form on my face. It was not a nice smile. I picked up my phone again. This time I dialed a number I hadn't used in a year. "Sarah," I said when she answered. "Langston, it is Christmas Eve. What's wrong?" Sarah O'Malley was my attorney. She was sharper than a razor and twice as cold. "Nothing is wrong, Sarah," I said. "But I need you to open a file. I need a full forensic background check on something called the Bright Future Foundation, and I need to know exactly who is on the guest list for a party happening at my cottage tomorrow night." "Langston, are you okay?" "I am fine," I said, "but my family is about to have a very difficult Christmas." I hung up. I watched the screen. My family was 2 hours away from the cottage. They had my credit cards in their pockets. They had a plan to rob me blind. But they forgot one thing. I owned the house. I owned the bank accounts. And I owned the data. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it slowly. I enjoyed the quiet. I knew that in about 3 hours the first credit card would be declined at a gas station or a liquor store. I wanted to be ready for the phone call, but the call didn't come from Beatrice. It didn't come from Tyson. At 3:00 p.m. my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank app. Transaction declined, $400. The Vintners Reserve. Card ending in 4098, Beatrice Hayes. I swiped the notification away. $5,000 for wine, for a healing weekend. 10 minutes later, the house phone rang. I let it ring. I checked the caller ID. It was Beatrice. She called 4 times in a row. Finally, I picked up. "Hello," I said, my voice groggy, pretending I had been asleep. "Langston." Her voice was a shriek. "There is something wrong with the card. I am standing at the counter with 5 cases of vintage Bordeaux, and the card is declining." "Fix it." I yawned. "Beatrice, I thought you were healing. Why are you buying $5,000 worth of wine? Don't you dare audit me right now. We have guests coming. Fix the card." "Guests?" I asked. "I thought it was just the 3 of you." There was a hesitation. A stutter. A lie forming in real time. We met some old friends on the way up. We invited them for a drink. Just a few people. "Don't be petty, Langston. Call the bank." I looked at the security footage on my computer screen. I saw the catering trucks at the cottage. Just a few people. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I said. "I cannot call the bank right now. It is a security hold. They called me earlier. They suspect identity theft because of the unusual spending patterns. I have to go into the branch personally to verify it." "So go." "Go now." "I cannot," I said. "The branch is closed for the holiday. It will not open until the 26th. There was a silence on the line. A silence of pure, unadulterated panic. "Langston, you have to do something. We need this wine." "I suggest you use cash, Beatrice. Or maybe Courtney can use the foundation's card. I'm sure a charity can justify $5,000 of alcohol." I hung up the phone. I unplugged it from the wall. Phase 1 was complete. I had cut off the supply line. Now it was time to investigate the enemy. I went back to my computer. Sarah had sent over the preliminary file on the Bright Future Foundation. I opened the PDF. I started reading. And what I saw made my blood run cold. This was not just a vanity project. This was a Ponzi scheme. And my name, Langston Hayes, was listed as the honorary chairman of the board. They had forged my signature. I sat there looking at the document. My son, my wife, my daughter-in-law. They weren't just ungrateful. They were criminals. And they were using my reputation to bait investors from across the Canadian border. I reached for the bottle of scotch. I poured another glass. I looked at the time. It was 4:30 p.m. The party was scheduled for tomorrow night. I had 24 hours to dismantle their entire lives, and I wasn't going to leave my study to do it. I opened a new email window. I typed in the address of a journalist I knew in Toronto, a man who specialized in cross-border financial fraud. Subject: "You might want to look at the party at 124 Lakeview Drive." I attached the PDF. I attached the security footage of Courtney talking about buying the house for pennies. I hit send. Then I sat back and waited for the night to fall. This was going to be a Christmas they would never forget, and I was just getting started. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of the coming storm. I watched the snow begin to fall outside, covering the driveway in white. It looked peaceful, but on my screen inside the cottage, the chaos was just beginning to brew. And I had a front row seat. The silence in my primary residence was not the silence of abandonment. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a war room before the first missile is launched. I walked through the hallways of the home I had paid for with 30 years of missed birthdays and delayed vacations, and I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. My wife Beatrice thought she had punished me by leaving me behind, but she had actually given me the greatest gift she could offer, which was the time and privacy to work without interruption. I did not go to the kitchen to mope over leftovers. I went straight to my study. This room was my sanctuary. It was lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with volumes on maritime law and global supply chain economics. In the center of the room sat my desk, a solid slab of oak that had belonged to a bank president in the 1920s. I sat down in my leather chair and swivels to face the wall of monitors I had installed when I retired. Most people my age used computers to look at photos of their grandchildren or to play solitaire, but I used mine to monitor my assets. I was a man who believed in verification over trust. I typed in a sequence of passwords that Beatrice would never guess because they did not involve her birthday or our anniversary. The screens flickered to life. I accessed the remote security node for the cottage. The system was state-of-the-art, a high-definition network of cameras and microphones I had installed 2 years ago after a string of break-ins in the area. I had never told Tyson or Courtney about the upgrade. They thought the blinking red lights on the porch were dummy cameras. They were wrong. The feed loaded and the image was crisp. It was snowing lightly at the border, but the driveway of my lake house was a hive of activity. I leaned forward and adjusted his glasses. I expected to see my family unpacking suitcases, perhaps lighting a fire in the hearth for a quiet evening. What I saw instead made my jaw tighten. There were 3 white vans parked on my lawn. Not in the driveway, but on the grass I paid a landscaper $2,000 a month to maintain. Men in coveralls were unloading crates. I switched camera views to the interior of the house. The living room, which I had designed for tranquility, looked like the staging ground for a circus. Courtney was standing in the center of the room. She was wearing a headset and holding a clipboard directing traffic like she was the foreman of a construction site. I zoomed in. She was pointing at my walls. 2 men were taking down the painting that hung above the fireplace. It was not just a painting, it was an original piece by a prominent Harlem Renaissance artist that my father had bought in the 50s. It was the most valuable thing in the house, not just in dollars, but in sentiment. I watched as the men handled it with careless hands, leaning it against a sofa like it was a piece of plywood. And then I saw what they were putting up in its place. It was a vinyl banner, a cheap glossy banner that read "The Bright Future Foundation, Winter Gala." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. This was not a healing retreat. This was an invasion. They were turning my private home into a venue for their fraud. I switched views to the dining room. My antique table, which seated 12, had been pushed against the wall. In its place, they were setting up high-top cocktail tables and a portable bar. They were transforming my sanctuary into a cheap nightclub. I watched Beatrice walk into the frame. She was holding a glass of wine and laughing with one of the workmen. She looked around the room with a sense of ownership that made my skin crawl. She was not stopping them. She was not protecting our home. She was reveling in the chaos. She pointed to my favorite leather armchair, the one I sat in to read in the mornings, and made a shooing motion. The workmen grabbed it and dragged it out of the room, presumably to shove it into the garage or the basement. They were erasing me. That was the only way to describe it. They were systematically removing every trace of Langston Hughes from the property. My books were being swept off shelves into boxes. My collection of model ships was being tossed into a laundry basket. They were scrubbing the house clean of my presence so they could present a lie to their guests. I sat there in my study 400 miles away, and I felt like a ghost haunting his own life. I watched them for an hour. I cataloged every piece of furniture they moved and every scratch they left on the floorboards. I was building a ledger of damages in my head, but the visual insults were nothing compared to what happened next. I saw Tyson walk into the living room. He looked agitated. He was pacing back and forth, waving his arms. Courtney stopped directing the workmen and turned to him. They began to argue. I reached for the control panel on my desk and activated the high-gain audio microphones in the living room. The sound quality was crystal clear. It was as if I were standing right next to them. Tyson was speaking. His voice was high and whiny. "Courtney, we cannot sell tickets at the door. It is illegal. We do not have a permit for a commercial event." Courtney laughed. It was a harsh sound. "Tyson, stop being such a coward. It is a private party. We are asking for donations. It is a gray area. Besides, who is going to report us? Your dad is sitting at home eating turkey sandwiches. He has no idea what is happening." Tyson rubbed his face. "But what if the neighbors call the cops? The noise ordinance is strict up here." "Let them call," Courtney said. "We will be done by midnight." "Look, Tyson, we need this money. We are underwater on the condo. We are underwater on the cars. If we pull this off tonight, we clear 200 grand easy." Tyson looked at the banner hanging over the fireplace. "But using the house. Dad is going to notice things are moved." "He is senile," Tyson Courtney snapped. She stepped closer to him, grabbing his lapels. "Listen to me. He is losing it. He forgot to sign the check last week, remember? He is getting confused. We just need to push that narrative." I froze. I was not confused last week. I had refused to sign the check because it was a bad investment. But she was twisting history. Courtney continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. "Once the gala is over, we take the proceeds and we hire that lawyer my mother knows. We file for competency hearings. We tell the judge your father is unable to manage his assets. We show them how he is hoarding money while his family suffers. We get power of attorney Tyson. And once we have that, we sell this place." "Sell it?" Tyson asked. "Yes, sell it," she hissed. "The market is hot. This place is worth $3 million at least. We sell it, we put the money in the foundation, and we pay ourselves a salary. We never have to work again. And your dad goes into a nice facility where they can manage his moods. It is a win-win." I sat back in my chair. The breath had been knocked out of me. They were not just throwing a party. They were planning a coup. They were plotting to strip me of my agency, my home, and my dignity. They wanted to lock me away in a home so they could liquidate 40 years of my hard work to fund their lifestyle. I looked at Tyson on the screen. My son, the boy I had taught to fish on that very lake, the boy I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say, "No, that is my father you are talking about," but he didn't. He looked at Courtney and he nodded. "Okay," he said, "but we have to be smart about it. We can't let him get suspicious. We have to make him think it is his idea to retire." "We will," Courtney said. She kissed him on the cheek. "You are a good husband, Tyson. We are doing this for our future. For their future. A future built on my grave." I turned off the audio. I could not listen to any more. My hand was shaking as I reached for the glass of water on my desk. It was not fear. It was adrenaline. It was the cold, hard realization that the people I loved were predators. I was not a father to them. I was a resource. I was a vein of gold they wanted to mine until it was empty. I looked at the clock. It was early afternoon. The party was hours away. They thought I was a senile old man. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was alone. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Sarah O'Malley. She answered on the first ring. "Langston," she said. "I sent you the file on the foundation. Did you get it?" "I did," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded like gravel. "But Sarah, I need something else." "What do you need?" she asked. "I need you to prepare a litigation strategy," I said. "I want you to look into the statutes for elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. And Sarah, I want you to hire a private investigator to go to the cottage tonight. I want high-resolution photos of every person who walks through that door." "Langston, what is going on?" she asked. Her tone was sharp professional. "My son and his wife are planning to have me committed, Sarah," I said. "They are planning to sell my house out from under me. They are throwing a fundraiser right now to raise the legal fees to do it." There was a silence on the line. Then I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking furiously. "I am opening a new file right now," Langston, Sarah said. "Do not confront them yet. Let them dig the hole. We will push them in later." "I am not going to confront them, Sarah," I said. "I am going to destroy them." I hung up the phone. I looked back at the screen. Courtney was laughing at something the workman said. She looked like the queen of the castle. "Enjoy it while it lasts, my dear," I whispered to the empty room. because by tomorrow morning you will not even own the clothes on your back." I turned back to my computer. It was time to go to work. I had a supply chain to disrupt. I had a cash flow to freeze. And I had a family to dismantle. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was focused. It was the quiet before the executioner drops the blade. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. The email from Sarah arrived with a ping that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet of my study. The subject line was stark and professional. Bright Future Foundation, preliminary financials. I did not open it immediately. I took a moment to adjust my reading glasses and straighten the papers on my desk. In my 30 years of managing logistics for a global shipping conglomerate, I learned that you never open a manifest unless you are prepared to deal with the contraband inside. I took a sip of water. My hands were steady. My heart was beating at a resting rate of 60 beats per minute. I was not a father looking at his son's school project. I was an auditor looking at a crime scene. I clicked the mouse. The file opened. It was a PDF thick with tables and pie charts designed to look impressive to the untrained eye. But I did not look at the colorful graphics. I looked at the raw data. I scrolled past the mission statement about empowering youth across borders. It was a word salad of buzzwords designed to make rich people feel guilty enough to open their checkbooks. I went straight to the cash flow statement. The foundation had been operating for 18 months. In that time, they had raised $250,000. That was $250,000. I felt a flicker of surprise. I did not think Tyson and Courtney had the work ethic to raise that kind of capital. But then I looked at the donor list. It was heavily weighted with names I recognized from my country club and business associates from Toronto. They had mined my contact list. They had used my name to open doors that would have otherwise been slammed in their faces. I moved to the expense column. This is where the story always falls apart. A legitimate charity operates with overhead costs between 10 and 15%. The Bright Future Foundation had an overhead of 85%. I ran the numbers again. It was impossible. 85 cents of every dollar donated was vanishing before it ever touched a charitable cause. I drilled down into the line items. There were massive payments listed under consulting fees. $7,000 a month to a company called C&T Strategic Solutions. I opened a new tab on my browser and searched the state business registry. C&T Strategic Solutions was an LLC registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. The registered agent was Courtney Hayes. They were paying themselves $7,000 a month to consult for their own charity. I kept scrolling. Travel expenses were listed at $40,000. The locations included Miami, Las Vegas, and a ski resort in Aspen. They had listed these trips as donor outreach. I remembered seeing photos on social media of Courtney in a bikini in Miami holding a mojito. That mojito was paid for by the widow of my former business partner who had donated $5,000 last Christmas. The rage I felt was not hot. It was a cold, absolute zero. This was not just mismanagement. This was embezzlement. It was theft. And it was sloppy. They had left a paper trail so wide a blind man could follow it. They treated the foundation like a personal piggy bank. There were charges for luxury car leases categorized as transportation logistics. There were charges for designer clothing categorized as uniform and branding expenses. I looked at the screen and I saw my son not as a struggling young man trying to find his way, but as a parasite. He was feeding off the goodwill of others. He was stealing from people who trusted me. I had spent 40 years building a reputation for unimpeachable integrity. In the shipping business, your word is your bond. If you say the cargo is there, it is there. And Tyson and Courtney were selling empty containers stamped with my name. I picked up a pen and started making notes on a legal pad. I calculated the tax liability. I calculated the potential prison time for wire fraud. I calculated the fines. They were already underwater. If the IRS audited them today, they would be in handcuffs by dinner time. But the IRS moves slow. I needed something faster. I needed to see how deep the rot went. I scrolled to the bottom of the document to the section labeled Board of Directors and Governance. This was usually a formality, a list of community leaders who lent their names to the cause. I expected to see Tyson listed as executive director. He was. I expected to see Courtney listed as president. She was. But then I saw the third name, the honorary chairman of the board, Langston Hayes. I stopped breathing. The air left the room. My name was there in bold black letters, but it was what was next to it that made my vision blur. There was a signature, my signature. I leaned in closer to the monitor. I knew my signature better than I knew the face of my own wife. It had a specific loop in the L and a sharp, aggressive cross on the T. It was a signature I had developed over decades of signing million-dollar contracts. And there it was at the bottom of a document authorizing the bylaws of this fraudulent organization. I had never signed this. I had never seen this document before in my life. I zoomed in to 400%. I looked at the pixels. The ink looked uniform, too uniform. It lacked the subtle pressure variations of a pen on paper. It was a digital lift. They had taken my signature from an old check or a birthday card, scanned it, and pasted it onto this document. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was forgery. This was identity theft. This was a federal crime. By listing me as the chairman, they made me legally liable for every cent they stole. If the authorities investigated, they would come for me first. They were using me as a human shield. I sat back in my leather chair, and the leather creaked in the silence. I looked at the family photo I had placed face down on the desk. I turned it over. I looked at Tyson's face from 10 years ago. He looked so innocent then. How did we get here? How did the boy I taught to ride a bike become a man who would frame his own father for fraud? I realized then that Courtney was the architect, but Tyson was the willing accomplice. He watched her do it. He might have even scanned the signature himself. He sold me out for a lease on a Range Rover and a few trips to Miami. The betrayal was so total it felt physical. It was a heaviness in my chest. But along with the heaviness came a clarity sharp as a diamond. They had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. There was no apology that could fix this. There was no family meeting that could resolve a felony. I picked up the phone to call Sarah, but I put it down. Sarah was a lawyer. She would tell me to file a police report. She would tell me to get an injunction. That was the legal way. But the legal way was public. The legal way would drag my name through the mud for months. I needed a surgical strike. I needed to cut the cancer out before it killed the host. I needed to destroy the foundation without destroying myself. And to do that, I needed the truth to come from someone else. I needed a third party, someone who could look at these numbers and see exactly what I saw. Someone with a platform. I thought of the contacts I had made over the years. I thought of the regulators and the auditors. But then I remembered the journalist. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was an investigative reporter based in Toronto who specialized in cross-border financial crimes. He had written an expose 5 years ago on a charity scam that was smuggling cash between Detroit and Windsor. He was aggressive, he was thorough, and he hated fraudsters with a passion that bordered on obsession. I had met him once at a logistics conference where he was a speaker. We had shared a drink. He had given me his card and told me that if I ever saw anything suspicious in the shipping lanes to give him a call. I opened my email client. I did not use my personal email address. I used a secure encrypted account I kept for sensitive business inquiries. An account that could not be traced back to the IP address of my home. I typed his address into the recipient field. The subject line needed to be boring but alarming. Subject: financial irregularities regarding cross-border solicitations. Bright Future Foundation. I started typing. I did not use my name. I wrote in the voice of a concerned insider, a former employee perhaps, or a disillusioned donor. Dear Mr. Thorne, I am writing to you regarding a matter of significant public interest involving the solicitation of funds from Canadian citizens by a U.S.-based entity known as the Bright Future Foundation. Attached, you will find preliminary financial documents indicating an overhead ratio exceeding 80%. You will also find evidence of payments made to shell companies registered to the Foundation's directors. I paused. I needed to give him the hook. I needed to give him the reason to look right now tonight on Christmas Eve. I continued typing. Furthermore, there is evidence that the Foundation is using the name and forged signature of a prominent logistics executive to secure these donations without his knowledge or consent. The directors of this foundation are currently hosting an unregistered fundraising gala at a private residence in upstate New York near the border. They are soliciting six-figure checks from your countrymen as we speak. I attached the PDF Sarah had sent me. I attached the screenshots of the C&T Strategic Solutions registration, and then I attached the video clip I had saved earlier. The one from the security camera where Courtney explicitly talked about buying the house for pennies on the dollar using the gala funds. I looked at the email. It was a torpedo. Once I fired it, there was no recalling it. Marcus Thorne would smell blood in the water. He would dig, he would make calls, he would publish. If I sent this, my son would go to prison. My daughter-in-law would go to prison. My wife would be publicly humiliated. The Hayes name would be scarred. But if I didn't send it, they would succeed. They would commit fraud in my name. They would steal my home. They would lock me away. They would destroy everything I built, and they would laugh while they did it. I looked at the cursor blinking at the end of the sentence. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. I thought about the $50,000 check. I thought about the word difficult. I thought about the empty chair at the Christmas table where I was supposed to be sitting. They wanted a legacy. I would give them one. I moved the mouse. My finger hovered over the send button. My hand did not shake. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself from across the room. The father in me was screaming to stop to protect them one last time. But the man in me, the man of logic and consequence, knew that protection was what had created this monster. You cannot protect people from their own character. You can only protect the world from them. I pressed down. The screen refreshed. Message sent. It was done. The digital packet was racing through the fiber optic cables heading north to Toronto. It would land in Marcus Thorne's inbox in seconds. He was a workaholic. I knew he would be checking his email even on Christmas Eve. I closed the laptop. The room felt different now. The air was charged. The war had officially begun. I had launched the first strike, and they didn't even know they were under attack. I stood up and walked to the window. It was pitch black outside. The snow was falling harder now. Somewhere north of here at the cottage, the champagne was flowing and the music was playing. They were celebrating their cleverness. I went to the liquor cabinet and poured myself another drink. I raised the glass to the window to the dark reflection of myself in the glass. "Merry Christmas, Tyson," I whispered. I walked back to the desk and sat down. Now I had to wait. But I wasn't just going to wait. I had access to the smart home system at the cottage. I had control over the environment. If they wanted a party, I would give them a show. I opened the control panel for the house systems. I looked at the thermostat settings. I looked at the lighting controls. I looked at the audio distribution system. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my money. Now they were going to lose their comfort. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to introduce a few technical difficulties to the evening. The audit was over. The execution phase had begun. The vibration of my phone on the mahogany desk was a short, violent burst that broke the silence of my study. It was not a ring. It was a notification from the bank. I picked up the device and adjusted my reading glasses. The screen was bright in the dim room. Transaction declined. $5,400. The Vintner Reserve. Card ending in 4098. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile that did not show my teeth. That was Beatrice's card. She was standing at a checkout counter 400 miles away, likely surrounded by cases of expensive French wine intended to impress people she did not know, and I had just humiliated her in the only language she truly understood, which was the language of access. For 40 years, Beatrice had moved through the world with the confidence of a woman who never had to check a balance. She slapped plastic on counters without looking at the total. She assumed the money was there because I was always there filling the accounts silently and efficiently like a utility company. But today the lights had gone out. I set the phone down and waited. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. On the count of 10, the landline on my desk began to scream. It was a shrill, demanding ring. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel the eyes of the cashier and the customers in line behind her. I wanted her to feel the heat of shame rising in her cheeks. I picked up the receiver on the 5th ring. "Hello," I said. My voice was calm, detached. I sounded like a man who had been napping, not a man who had just executed a tactical financial strike. "Langston, fix it." Beatrice did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She screamed into the phone with a mixture of panic and rage that made the speaker distort. "Fix what, Beatrice?" I asked. I leaned back in my leather chair and took a sip of my scotch. "The card," she shrieked. "The damn card is declining. I am standing here with $5,000 of Bordeaux and the machine is beeping at me. The cashier is looking at me like I am a pauper. Call the bank. Authorize the charge. Right now." I paused. I let the silence stretch across the line. I imagined the scene. The Vintner Reserve was a high-end shop near the border. It smelled of oak and old money. Beatrice would be wearing her fur coat, tapping her manicured nails on the glass counter. "Beatrice," I said slowly, "I cannot fix it." "What do you mean you cannot fix it? You are Langston Hayes. You fix everything. Call them." "I am looking at the alert on my phone," I said. "It says the card has been flagged for suspicious activity. The bank's fraud algorithm locked it down. They suspect the card has been stolen or cloned because of the unusual spending pattern in a different geographic location." "It is me," she yelled. "I am the one spending it. Tell them it is me." "I cannot do that over the phone," I lied. My voice was smooth like oil. Since the breach last year, they updated their security protocols. For a transaction of this size triggered by a fraud alert, the primary account holder must appear in person at a branch with 2 forms of identification. There was a silence on the line. It was the silence of a woman realizing she was trapped. "Go to the branch," then she hissed. "Go to the one on Main Street." "I cannot, Beatrice. It is Christmas Eve. The branch closed at noon. It will not reopen until the 26th. You have to do something," she pleaded. Her anger was cracking, revealing the desperation underneath. "We need this wine. The guests are coming. We cannot serve tap water." "I thought you went up there to heal," I said. My voice was devoid of sympathy. "I thought this was a quiet family retreat. Why do you need $5,000 of wine for 3 people? Stop it, Langston. Do not lecture me. Just find a way. Transfer money to Tyson. Do something." "I cannot transfer money to Tyson," I said. "I flagged his accounts too, just to be safe. You know how dangerous identity theft is these days. I am just protecting our assets, Beatrice. I am being responsible." "You are being difficult," she spat. "That is what you are doing. You are punishing us." "I am not punishing anyone," I said. "I am sitting in my house alone eating a sandwich because you told me I was unwanted. I am simply following the bank's security protocols. Perhaps you should have planned better, or perhaps you should use your own money." I hung up. I did not say goodbye. I placed the receiver back on the cradle and disconnected the cord from the wall. I did not want to hear her call back. I did not want to hear her begging. The game had shifted. She was no longer the queen of the manor. She was a woman with a declined card and a shopping cart full of debt. I turned back to my monitors. I brought up the feed from the living room of the cottage. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Beatrice stormed in. She was empty-handed. She threw her purse onto the sofa I had bought 10 years ago and kicked off her boots. "She looks furious," I whispered to the empty room. Courtney walked into the frame. She was holding a clipboard. "Where is the wine, Beatrice?" she asked. "The caterers are setting up the bar. We need the Bordeaux for the VIP tasting flight." Beatrice paced the room. "Your father-in-law," she spat. "He cut us off. The cards are dead. He says it is a fraud alert, but I know him. He is doing this on purpose. He is squeezing us." Courtney's face went pale. She dropped the clipboard onto the coffee table. "What do you mean dead?" "All of them." "All of them," Beatrice confirmed. "Mine, Tyson's. He locked the accounts. We have 0 purchasing power." Tyson walked in from the kitchen. He was holding a bottle of cheap beer. "What is going on?" he asked. "Why is Mom yelling?" "Your dad froze the money," Courtney said. Her voice was tight, controlled. She was calculating. She was a shark realizing there was blood in the water, but it was her own. "We have no wine. We have no food for the main course. The caterer wants the second half of the deposit in cash upon arrival." Tyson dropped into a chair. He looked like a child who had lost his balloon. "We are screwed," he said. "We have to cancel. We cannot throw a gala with no food and no booze. The investors will laugh at us. We are not canceling," Courtney snapped. She turned on him, eyes blazing. "Do you know how much we have invested in this? Do you know who is coming? If we cancel, we look like amateurs. We look like frauds. We need that money, Tyson. We need the donations tonight, or we lose the condo next month." She was panicking. I could see it in the way she twisted the ring on her finger. The pressure was mounting. They were leveraged to the hilt, and I had just removed the only strut keeping their house of cards standing. "So what do we do?" Tyson asked. Courtney took a deep breath. She looked around the room as if the solution would materialize from the expensive wallpaper. Then she walked over to her designer handbag. She reached inside and pulled out a thick envelope. I zoomed in with the camera. It was a bank bag. The kind businesses use for deposits. We use the reserve, she said. Tyson stood up. No, Courtney, no. That is the seed money. That is the cash from the Toronto donors. We cannot touch that. That is illegal. That is embezzlement. It is survival. Tyson, she hissed. She opened the bag. I saw stacks of $100 bills. There must have been $10,000 there. This is meant for the scholarship fund, Tyson said. His voice was weak. He knew he was losing the argument. There is no scholarship fund yet, you idiot, Courtney said. She started counting the bills. We use this cash to pay the caterer. We use this cash to go buy the wine at the liquor store down the road. We pay retail. We get the party moving. And tonight, when the big checks come in, we replace it. No one will ever know. Tyson ran a hand through his hair. Dad will know. He watches everything. Your dad is 400 miles away getting drunk in his study, Courtney said. She shoved the cash into Tyson's chest. Go. Take my car. Go to the liquor store. Buy everything they have on the top shelf. Do not ask for a receipt. Just get it done. Tyson held the money like it was radioactive. But what if we don't raise enough tonight? What if we can't pay it back? Then we sell the house faster, Courtney said. She looked directly at the camera, though she didn't know I was watching. We get the power of attorney next week. We liquidate this place. And we wash the money through the foundation. It is a loan, Tyson. We are loaning ourselves the money to save the family business. Now go. Tyson looked at his mother. Beatrice was pouring herself a drink from a bottle she must have found in the back of a cabinet. She did not look at him. She did not stop him. She was complicit. She wanted her party. She wanted her status. She did not care where the money came from as long as the wine kept flowing. Tyson turned and walked out the door, clutching the stolen money. I sat back in my chair. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. They had just crossed the line from unethical to criminal. They were using charitable donations for personal expenses. They were co-mingling funds, and they had done it on camera. I saved the video clip. I backed it up to 3 different servers. This was not just evidence for a lawsuit. This was evidence for an indictment. I picked up my glass of scotch. The ice had melted. It was watery, but it tasted like victory. They thought they had solved the problem. They thought they had outsmarted the difficult old man, but all they had done was hand me the nail for their coffin. I looked at the time. It was 4 in the afternoon. The party started at 7. The guests would be arriving soon. The investors from Canada. The marks. I opened my email again. I had one more message to send. This one was to the catering company. I knew who they were because I saw the logo on the side of their van in the driveway earlier. Elite Pallet Catering. I typed quickly, to whom it may concern. Please be advised that the credit card on file for the event at 124 Lakeview Drive has been reported stolen. Any charges processed on this card will be contested and reversed as fraudulent. I strongly suggest you demand full payment in cash immediately or cease operations. I hit send. Then I sat back to watch the show. Courtney thought she had solved the cash flow problem with the stolen donation money, but she didn't know that the caterer's bill was $15,000, and she only had $10,000 in that envelope. The math didn't work. And in my world, when the math doesn't work, someone pays the price. I watched on the screen as the catering manager checked his phone. He frowned. He looked at Courtney. He started walking toward her. I leaned forward. The minor inconveniences were over. The major disasters were about to begin, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The memory of that afternoon 2 weeks ago played in my mind with the clarity of a high-definition film. I sat in my study surrounded by the hum of my servers, but my thoughts were back in the passenger seat of Tyson's car. He was driving me to a strip mall on the outskirts of town. He had told me that my primary care physician, Dr. Vance, had retired suddenly. It was a lie. I had played golf with Dr. Vance 3 days prior, and he had not mentioned retirement. He had mentioned that his handicap was improving. But I did not correct Tyson. I let him drive. I let him believe he was leading the lamb to the slaughter. We arrived at a clinic that smelled of rubbing alcohol and desperation. The sign on the door read, Total Wellness Center. It was the kind of place that specialized in opioid prescriptions and insurance fraud. We sat in the waiting room on plastic chairs that stuck to my trousers. I reached into the breast pocket of my tweed jacket and clicked the top of my ballpoint pen. It was not a pen. It was a high-fidelity audio recorder capable of capturing a whisper from across the room. The red light blinked once, indicating it was active. I placed it back in my pocket. A man came out to greet us. He was white, in his late 40s, wearing a lab coat that looked a size too small. He introduced himself as Dr. Evans. He did not shake my hand. He looked at Tyson and gave him a nod of recognition that suggested a prearranged transaction. "Mr. Hayes, come on back," he said. I shuffled my feet as I walked. I let my shoulders slump. I kept my mouth slightly open. I was playing the part Tyson had written for me. I was the confused burden. I was the old man losing his grip on reality. We sat in an examination room that lacked the usual tools of the trade. There was no blood pressure cuff on the wall. There were no jars of cotton balls. There was just a desk and a computer. "So Tyson tells me you have been having some trouble with your memory," Dr. Evans said. He did not look at me. He looked at the computer screen. I looked around the room, pretending to be distracted by a poster of the human skeletal system. "I suppose," I said. My voice was thin and wavering. "Sometimes I lose my keys." Tyson leaned forward. "It is more than keys, doctor. He forgets where he is. He gets aggressive. Last week he yelled at my wife for no reason. He thought she was stealing his silverware. I had yelled at Courtney because she was loading my silverware into her purse, but I did not say that. I just looked at the floor and picked at a loose thread on my trousers. "I see," Dr. Evans said. He typed something. "Aggression is a common symptom of early onset dementia. It can be very difficult for the family." He did not ask me to recall 3 words. He did not ask me to subtract 7 from 100. He did not check my pupil dilation. He was diagnosing me based on the testimony of a man who owed $50,000 in gambling debts. "Do you know what year it is, Mr. Hayes?" Dr. Evans asked. I paused. I let the silence stretch. I knew it was 2023. I knew the date, the time, and the current trading price of gold. "I think it is 1998, I said softly. Tyson let out a heavy sigh. "See, this is what we are dealing with." Dr. Evans nodded gravely. "It seems the cognitive decline is advanced. I can prescribe something to help with the agitation. It will keep him calm. It will make him easier to manage at home." Easier to manage. I was not a patient to them. I was livestock. "Is it safe?" I asked. "I do not like pills." "It is perfectly safe," Dr. Evans said. "It is a mild sedative. Haloperidol. It will just help you sleep, Mr. Hayes. You need your rest." He wrote the prescription. He handed it to Tyson. "Not me. Make sure he takes this every night," Dr. Evans said. "1 in the evening. It will keep him from wandering." I looked at the prescription pad on the desk. I memorized the DEA number printed on the top. I memorized the spelling of his name. I looked at Tyson's face. He looked relieved. He thought he had won. He thought he had the medical paper trail he needed to lock me away. We left the clinic. I shuffled back to the car. But inside my chest, my heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a war drum. I had them. I had the doctor on tape prescribing an antipsychotic to a man he had examined for less than 5 minutes. I had him conspiring with my son to chemically restrain me. Back in the present moment, inside my study, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pen. I unscrewed the cap and revealed the USB connector. I plugged it into my computer. The drive appeared on my screen. I opened the file. The waveform of the audio appeared jagged lines representing the betrayal of my son and the corruption of a medical professional. I put on my headphones. I played the file. The audio was crisp. I heard Dr. Evans' voice clearly. "Aggression is a common symptom. It will make him easier to manage." I opened my email client again. This time, I was not emailing a journalist. I was emailing the State Medical Board. I had the direct email address for the head of the ethics committee, a woman I had served with on a hospital board years ago. Subject: urgent report of medical malpractice and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Gregory Evans. I typed the body of the email with the precision of a sniper. Dear Director, attached you will find an audio recording taken on December 10th at the clinic of Dr. Gregory Evans. In this recording, you will hear Dr. Evans diagnosing a patient with advanced dementia without performing a single cognitive test. You will hear him prescribing haloperidol, a strong antipsychotic based solely on the false testimony of a family member who has a financial interest in the patient's incapacitation. I paused. I needed to make sure they understood the stakes. This physician is selling diagnoses. He is an active participant in an elder abuse scheme. The patient in the recording is me, Langston Hayes. I am of sound mind and body. I am submitting this evidence to protect not only myself but future victims of this predator. I demand an immediate suspension of his license pending an investigation. I attached the audio file. I attached a scanned copy of the prescription which I had fished out of the trash after Tyson threw away the receipt. I hit send. Another missile launched. Dr. Evans would be answering questions from investigators by Monday morning. His career was over. He just didn't know it yet. I sat back and rubbed my temples. The game was exhausting. It required a level of vigilance that I had hoped to leave behind in the corporate world. But I could not rest. Not yet. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Tyson. Dad just checking in. Did you take your medicine? Dr. Evans called and said it is really important you stay calm tonight. The pills are in the kitchen cabinet above the sink. Please take one. We want you to rest. Love you. I read the message twice. Love you. The audacity of it made me laugh a dry, humorless sound. He did not love me. He wanted me unconscious. He wanted me comatose so that if I decided to crash the party or call the police, I would be too groggy to make sense. He wanted me to be the drooling old man he told everyone I was. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The house was dark now. The only light came from the security LEDs on the motion sensors outside. I opened the cabinet above the sink. There it was, an orange prescription bottle with my name on it. Langston Hayes. Take 1 tablet daily at bedtime. I opened the bottle. The pills were small and white. They looked innocent, but they were chemical handcuffs. Haloperidol was used to treat schizophrenia. It caused sedation, confusion, and lethargy. If I took this, I would be out for 12 hours. I walked to the sink. I turned on the faucet. I poured the pills into the drain. I watched them swirl away into the darkness. I turned on the garbage disposal just to be sure they were ground into dust. But I could not just leave the bottle empty. Tyson might come back. He might check. He needed to believe his plan was working. I went to my vitamin stash. I found a bottle of high-dose vitamin B12. The pills were white and round, almost identical to the antipsychotics. Vitamin B12 was energy. It was clarity. It was exactly what I needed for a long night of surveillance and retribution. I filled the prescription bottle with the vitamins. I screwed the cap back on tight. I placed it back on the shelf exactly where I found it. I took out my phone and replied to Tyson. Took it just now. Feeling sleepy already. Have a good night, son. I hit send. I was lying. I was not sleepy. The B12 was already in my system, sharpening my focus. I was wide awake. I was more awake than I had been in 20 years. I walked back to my study. The screens were glowing. The party at the cottage was about to begin. The guests were arriving. I saw a black limousine pull into the driveway. A man in a tuxedo stepped out. I recognized him. He was a real estate developer from Montreal. A man with deep pockets and a shallow understanding of due diligence. He was the perfect mark for Courtney. I sat down. I cracked my knuckles. They wanted me asleep. They wanted me silenced. Instead, they had just given me a front row seat to their destruction. I checked the time. 7 p.m. The gala was starting. I opened the control panel for the smart home system. It was time to turn up the heat. Literally. I looked at the thermostat settings. It was currently a comfortable 72 degrees inside the cottage. Outside, it was 5 degrees below zero. I smiled. Let us see how generous the donors feel when they are shivering. I typed in a command. I overrode the manual controls. I set the target temperature for the main heating zone to 50 degrees, and then I disabled the interface so they could not change it back. The furnace at the cottage shut down with a silent digital command. The warmth would bleed out of the house slowly. At first, they would just feel a chill. Then they would put on their coats. Then they would realize that something was very wrong. Phase 3 was active. The doctor was reported. The drugs were flushed. And the house was freezing. I poured myself a glass of water. I needed to stay hydrated. It was going to be a long, entertaining night. The digital clock on my desk read 7:14 p.m. The night had fully descended upon upstate New York, wrapping my primary residence in a blanket of darkness and silence. But 400 miles north at the cottage, the lights were blazing. On my wall of monitors, the feed from the security cameras showed a procession of luxury vehicles navigating the snowy driveway. It looked like a funeral procession for the wealthy, only they were not burying a body, they were burying their own money. I sat in my leather chair, my eyes scanning the faces of the guests as they handed their coats to the catering staff I had warned only hours ago. The staff looked nervous. They were demanding cash payments for tips up front. I saw Tyson scurrying back and forth, his pockets bulging with the cash he had stolen from the foundation reserve, handing out bills to keep the service running. It was a chaotic start, but to the untrained eye it looked like exclusive hospitality. I recognized the first major arrival. It was Robert Leclerc, a real estate mogul from Montreal. I had done business with his father 20 years ago. Robert was a man who leveraged everything he owned to buy things he did not need. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Courtney greeted him at the door. She was wearing a silver gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. She looked like a trophy. She looked like success. She kissed Robert on both cheeks and guided him toward the bar where the wine Beatrice had fought so hard for was being poured. Next came the Americans. I saw Sterling Vance, a venture capitalist from Buffalo who had made a fortune in tech startups and lost half of it in cryptocurrency. He was looking for the next sure thing. Courtney had clearly pitched the foundation as a tax haven disguised as philanthropy. She was whispering in his ear, touching his arm, laughing at jokes that I knew were not funny. She was working the room with the efficiency of a predator in a school of slow fish. I leaned forward and typed a command into my console. I activated the facial recognition software I used for securing high-value cargo shipments. I wanted a log of every person in that room. If this turned into a federal RICO case, I wanted to know exactly who the CO conspirators and the victims were. The software began to populate a list on my secondary screen. There were local politicians. There were board members from other charities. There were people I had invited to barbecues 10 years ago, people who now thought I was too difficult to be in their presence. They were drinking my liquor. They were standing on my hardwood floors. They were admiring the view of the frozen lake through my windows. And they were listening to my daughter-in-law spin a web of lies about global outreach and borderless education. I watched Tyson. He was standing near the fireplace holding a glass of scotch. He looked terrified. His eyes kept darting to the front door as if he expected the police to kick it in at any moment. He knew they were spending stolen money. He knew the walls were closing in, but he was too weak to stop it. He was a passenger in a car driven by a woman who had cut the brake lines. Then the camera shifted to the center of the room. Beatrice had taken her position. She was standing under the crystal chandelier holding court. She was wearing the diamond necklace I bought her for our 40th anniversary. It was a string of flawless stones that represented 4 decades of my labor. Tonight it looked like a noose. She was talking to a group of 3 women wives of the investors. I turned up the audio gain on the microphone nearest to her. "Oh yes," Beatrice was saying, her voice dripping with affected modesty. "We have owned this estate for generations. It is the family seat. We come here to recharge. Langston and I always intended for Tyson and Courtney to take it over. It is their legacy, really." I took a sip of my water. Generations. I bought the land in 1995 from a farmer named McCready. There were no generations. There was just a check I wrote and a deed with my name on it. Beatrice continued gesturing with her champagne flute. "We are planning a massive renovation in the spring. We want to add a guest wing and an indoor pool. The foundation needs space to host its annual summits. We are thinking of naming the new wing after my grandfather." She was selling them a fantasy. She was leveraging a property she did not own to build credibility for a scam she did not understand. She truly believed that because she was my wife, she was entitled to rewrite history. She did not know that the prenuptial agreement she signed 40 years ago and had likely forgotten about specifically designated all real estate acquired during the marriage as sole property of the primary earner if purchased through the separate investment trust. The cottage was in the trust. She owned nothing. I watched her laugh. It was a high tinkling sound. She looked happy. She looked powerful. She had no idea that her credit cards were dead. She had no idea that her husband was systematically dismantling her life from a study 400 miles away. She was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and she thought she was flying. The conversation shifted. One of the women, a brunette with heavy jewelry, leaned in. "But Beatrice, where is Langston? We expected to see him. Is he unwell?" The room seemed to quiet down. This was the question, the elephant in the room. Why was the honorary chairman not at his own gala? Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked toward Courtney, seeking a lifeline. Courtney saw the signal. She excused herself from the venture capitalist and glided over to the group. She put her arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "Oh, it is so sad," Courtney said. Her voice dropped an octave. It became somber, respectful. "We did not want to make a grand announcement because tonight is about the future, not the past. But Dad is struggling. Struggling how the brunette asked." Courtney sighed. She looked down at the floor, then back up with eyes that glistened with fake tears. "It is his mind. The dementia has progressed so rapidly. Last month he was fine. Today he does not even know who we are." I sat frozen in my chair. The rage that had been a cold knot in my stomach expanded, filling my lungs. Dementia. Courtney continued, warming to her performance. "We tried to bring him. We really did. But he gets violent, he gets confused, he thinks people are stealing from him. It was too dangerous to have him around the children, around the guests. We had to make the difficult decision to place him in a specialized facility yesterday." A gasp went through the small circle. Beatrice nodded, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "It broke my heart," she whispered, "to leave him there on Christmas. But it is what he wanted. In his lucid moments he told us, 'Beatrice, protect the legacy. Ensure the foundation succeeds. Do not let my illness stop the work.' Lies. Pure, unadulterated lies. They were burying me alive. They were using my alleged incapacity to solicit sympathy and money." Courtney raised her voice slightly, addressing the room at large. "Everyone, please, if I could have your attention." The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. She stood on the raised hearth of the fireplace beneath the cheap vinyl banner. "I know many of you are asking about Langston," she said. Her voice wavered perfectly. "My father-in-law is a great man, a titan of industry. But even titans fall. As many of you know, his health has deteriorated. He is currently under 24-hour care. But his final wish, his absolute command to Tyson and me, was that this gala go forward." She paused for effect. She looked at Tyson, who was looking at his shoes. "He told us," Courtney said, "raise the money. Build the schools. Do not let my fading memory stop the bright future we planned. That is why we are here. To honor him. To honor his checkbook." There was a murmur of assent. People were nodding. They were buying it. The narrative was perfect. The tragic decline of a great man, the heroic children stepping up to carry the torch. So Courtney said, raising her glass, "I am asking you tonight not just to donate, but to invest. Invest in Langston's legacy. We have a goal of $500,000 tonight. If we hit it, we can break ground on the first center in the spring. Do it for the children. Do it for Langston." She drank. The room drank. And then the checkbooks came out. I watched as Robert Leclerc pulled out a checkbook. I watched as Sterling Vance reached for his inside pocket. I reached for my mouse. I clicked on the video recording software. Save clip. Save as evidence exhibit A. I had them. This was fraud. This was theft by deception. They were soliciting funds based on a materially false statement regarding my health and my wishes. In the eyes of the law, this was a felony. I looked at the timestamp on the video, 7:45 p.m. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Option 0. It contained the dossier I had compiled over the last 48 hours. It contained the tax returns. It contained the forged signature. It contained the recording of Dr. Evans. And now it contained the video of Courtney declaring me mentally incompetent and soliciting funds on my behalf. I looked at the faces of my family, Beatrice preening in her stolen diamonds, Tyson cowering in the corner, Courtney glowing with the adrenaline of the con. They thought I was in a home. They thought I was drooling in a cup. I was not in a home. I was in the command center, and I was about to drop the hammer. I opened the email draft I had prepared for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Crimes Unit and the FBI White Collar Crimes Division. Subject: immediate report of wire fraud and charity scams involving cross-border transactions. I attached the files. I attached the video clip I had just recorded. I hesitated for 1 second, just one. I thought about the little boy I had held in my arms 32 years ago. I thought about the woman I had married in a small church in Georgia. But then I looked at the screen again. I saw Courtney laughing as she took a check from Robert Leclerc. I saw her verify the amount. I saw the greed in her eyes. They killed the father. They killed the husband. All that was left was the auditor. I pressed the enter key. Message sent. I leaned back. The clock ticked. 10 p.m. The authorities had the information. The journalist had the information. The medical board had the information. Now it was time to make the guests uncomfortable. I opened the smart home control panel again. The temperature inside the house had already dropped to 65 degrees. People were starting to button their jackets, but it wasn't cold enough yet. I looked at the lighting controls. I selected the preset labeled Strobe Alarm. It was designed to disorient intruders. I looked at the audio system. I had uploaded a specific audio file to the server earlier that day. It was not Christmas music. It was a recording I had captured from the security cameras 3 days ago. It was the argument between Tyson and Courtney where she called me a useless old relic and he called her a money-hungry leech. I queued it up. I looked at the screen one last time. They were toasting. They were celebrating. "Let the games begin," I whispered. I hit execute on the lighting command. On the screen, the warm yellow light of the chandelier vanished. It was replaced by a harsh, blinding white light that flashed on and off at a rate of 10 times per second. The party stopped. Guests covered their eyes. Someone dropped a glass. And then I hit play on the audio. My voice was not the one that filled the room. It was Courtney's voice amplified to 100 decibels booming from the hidden speakers in the ceiling. "I don't care if he dies. Tyson, we need the money." The look on Courtney's face as her own voice echoed through the room was worth every penny I had spent on that house. The war was no longer silent. It was loud, it was flashing, and it was just getting started. I sat in the darkness of my study, illuminated only by the cold blue light of the monitors. The video feed from the cottage played on, but the sound was muted. I did not need to hear any more. I had heard my daughter-in-law declare me incompetent. I had heard my wife rewrite our history to suit her vanity. I had seen my sons stand by in silence while they buried my reputation along with my agency. For 40 years, I operated under a code of conduct. Family was sacred. You protect them. You provide for them. You forgive them. I had applied this code even when Tyson failed out of college the first time. I applied it when Beatrice overspent our budget by 30% for 5 years running. I applied it when Courtney entered our lives with her eyes fixed on my wallet rather than my son. But codes of conduct rely on reciprocity. A contract is void when one party acts in bad faith. And tonight the breach of contract was total. I looked at the glass of scotch on my desk. I picked it up and walked to the sink in the wet bar across the room. I poured it down the drain. I needed 0 impairments. I needed the cold, hard clarity of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. The man who had poured that drink an hour ago still held on to a shred of hope. He thought maybe a scare would be enough. Maybe shutting off the credit cards and freezing the house would bring them to their senses. That man was gone. The Langston Hayes who sat back down at the desk was not a father or a husband. He was the vice president of logistics. He was the man who once fired an entire regional division in a single afternoon because they were skimming off the top. I opened the biometric safe built into the side of my desk. I placed my thumb on the scanner. It beeped and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside there was a single black hard drive labeled Project Border. I had compiled this data 6 months ago. At the time I told myself it was insurance. I told myself I would never use it. It was too nuclear. It would destroy Tyson's life so thoroughly that he would never recover. I had planned to burn it. I had planned to take these secrets to my grave to protect my son from federal prison. But Tyson had made his choice. He chose the lie. He chose the theft. He chose to declare me dead while I was still breathing. I plugged the drive into the tower. The folder opened. Option 0. That was what we called it in the industry. When a supply chain is so compromised, so infected with corruption that it cannot be fixed, you do not repair it. You nuke it. You sever all ties. You burn the manifests. You initiate option 0. I opened the files. It was an autopsy of my son's financial life. Block 2. The documents on the screen were dense with numbers, routing codes, and transaction histories. To the average person, they looked like boring bank statements. To me, they looked like a confession. I opened the subfolder labeled Cayman Holdings. 2 years ago, Tyson came to me asking for advice on international shipping regulations. He said he was starting a consulting firm to help small businesses navigate customs. I was proud. I gave him my contacts. I gave him advice. I did not know he was using that knowledge to build a money laundering apparatus. The documents showed a series of wire transfers from the Bright Future Foundation operating account to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands called C&T Global Logistics. The directors of C&T Global were not listed publicly, but I had dug deeper. I had traced the IP addresses used to access the accounts. They resolved to my own home network and the Wi-Fi at Tyson's condo. They were moving money out of the country. They were taking donations meant for charity and funneling them into an offshore account to avoid U.S. taxes. That was evasion. That was wire fraud. That was money laundering. I pulled up the invoices. They were masterpieces of fiction. Invoice number 409. Consulting services for cross-border supply chain optimization. Amount $25,000. There were no services, there was no supply chain, there was just Courtney wanting a new car and Tyson needing to pay off a gambling debt. I cross-referenced the dates. Every time a large donation hit the foundation account, a corresponding invoice was generated by C&T Global within 48 hours. They were bleeding the beast as fast as they fed it. I looked at the total in the Cayman account. $150,000. That was federal prison time. That was 10 years minimum. And they had been stupid. They had used their real passports to open the accounts during a vacation I paid for. They had signed the documents with their real signatures. They left a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to their front door. I felt a pang of nausea, not because of what I was about to do, but because of the sheer waste of it. I had given Tyson every opportunity. I had paid for tutors. I had paid for private schools. I had opened doors for him that most men spend a lifetime trying to unlock, and he used all of it to become a petty thief. He wasn't a businessman, he was a crook, and he was a bad one. I closed the invoice file. I opened the tax returns they had filed jointly last year. They had declared an income of $40,000. They qualified for government assistance based on these numbers, yet they drove Range Rovers and wore Rolexes. Tax fraud. The IRS did not have a sense of humor about lifestyle audits. I had the evidence. I had the intent. I had the motive. I looked at the folder. It was a smoking gun, and I was about to hand it to the executioners. Block 3. I opened my secure email client again. I drafted a new message. This one was not going to a journalist. This one was going to the people who carried badges and guns. Recipient 1. FBI Financial Crimes Division, New York Field Office. Recipient 2. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Integrity Unit. Recipient 3. IRS Criminal Investigation Division Whistleblower Office. Subject: Immediate report of international money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Priority high. I typed the body of the email. I kept it brief. I kept it factual. To the special agent in charge. Attached is a dossier containing banking records, wire transfer logs, and incorporation documents for a shell entity known as C&T Global Logistics based in the Cayman Islands. These documents demonstrate a pattern of systematic money laundering and tax evasion perpetuated by U.S. citizens Tyson Hayes and Courtney Hayes operating under the guise of a charitable organization known as the Bright Future Foundation. I attached the entire Project Border Drive content. Gigabytes of damning evidence. I added one final line. The subjects are currently located at 124 Lakeview Drive near the Canadian border, attempting to solicit further funds from international investors based on fraudulent financial statements. They are a flight risk. I checked the attachments. Everything was there. The map to their destruction was complete. Then I opened a second email window. This one was to Sarah O'Malley. Subject: Civil Litigation Strategy. Option 0 initiated. Sarah: I am proceeding with the nuclear option. I have reported the federal crimes. I need you to prepare the civil filings immediately. I want eviction notices served for the condo. I want a restraining order against Tyson and Courtney. And Sarah, I want you to draft a divorce petition. Irreconcilable differences, infidelity, financial infidelity, moral. I want Beatrice out of the house by January 1st. I attached the same evidence file. I looked at the digital clock on my computer screen. It clicked over from 9:59 to 10 p.m. exactly. The witching hour. I did not hesitate. I did not pray. I did not cry. I clicked send on the law enforcement email. I clicked send on the attorney email. The progress bars zipped across the screen. Sent. Sent. It was done. The information was in the wild. The gears of the federal justice system were grinding to life. Somewhere in a federal building, a server was flagging this priority. An agent was getting a notification. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled a long, slow breath. The room felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. I had spent my life building a fortress to protect my family. Tonight I had turned the guns inward. I looked at the monitor showing the cottage. Courtney was laughing. Tyson was drinking. Beatrice was preening. They had no idea that they were already dead men walking. I reached for the smart home control panel. The legal missiles were in the air. Now it was time for the psychological warfare. I selected the HVAC controls. I selected the lighting grid. I selected the audio server. It is time to clear the room, I said. My finger hovered over the execute button. The time for mercy was over. The time for consequences had arrived. The digital thermostat on my monitor showed the internal temperature of the cottage plummeting. 70 degrees, 68, 65. I sat in my study 400 miles away watching the numbers drop with the cold satisfaction of a scientist observing a successful experiment. Outside the cottage, the Canadian winter was howling at 5 degrees below zero. Inside, I had just opened the gates to let that winter in. I had accessed the HVAC master control unit, a system I had paid $60,000 to install. It was designed for efficiency and comfort, but tonight I had repurposed it for tactical warfare. I did not simply turn the dial down. I initiated the emergency venting protocol. This function was intended to clear smoke rapidly in the event of a kitchen fire by opening the damper vents in the attic and the subfloor. It turned the house into a wind tunnel. I watched the video feed. At first, the guests did not notice. They were insulated by the warmth of alcohol and the adrenaline of their own self-importance. But thermodynamics is a law that cannot be bribed or charmed. The cold crept in silently. It started as a draft around the ankles, a chill that snaked up the spine. I saw a woman in a strapless blue gown rub her arms and shiver. I saw Robert Leclerc, the real estate mogul, button his tuxedo jacket. The heat was bleeding out of the house. The warmth they had stolen from me was dissipating into the night. Tyson noticed it first. He walked over to the wall-mounted control unit in the hallway. I zoomed in on the camera feed. He was pressing the touch screen furiously, his fingers stabbing at the glass. He was trying to raise the temperature. But I had locked out the local controls. The screen displayed a bright red padlock icon and the message, "System Override Administrator, Access Required." Tyson looked confused. He looked around the room as if searching for an adult to help him. He caught Courtney's eye. She was in the middle of a laugh that looked brittle. He mouthed the words, "It is freezing." She frowned and gestured for him to fix it. He couldn't fix it. He didn't know the admin password. He didn't even know there was an admin password. He was a tourist in a house he claimed to own. The temperature dropped to 60 degrees. Guests were now openly looking for their coats. The coat check girl who had been demanding cash tips earlier was overwhelmed as people demanded their furs and wool trenches. "You wanted to freeze me out of my own family," I whispered to the screen. "Now you know what 0 degrees feels like." The physical discomfort was setting in, but I needed more. Cold makes people grumpy, but it doesn't make them leave. I needed chaos. I needed to break their sensory composure. I minimized the HVAC window and opened the lighting grid. The cottage was equipped with a Lutron system capable of millions of colors and programmable sequences. I had programmed a sequence years ago for security testing. It was called Intruder Disorient. It was designed to flash the lights in a randomized stroboscopic pattern at full intensity. It was intended to induce nausea and confusion in a burglar. Tonight, the burglars were wearing tuxedos and drinking my vintage Bordeaux. I looked at the time. It was 10:20 p.m. The speeches were over. The networking was in full swing. The checks had been written. It was the perfect time for a light show. I selected all zones: living room, dining room, kitchen, foyer, even the exterior floodlights that illuminated the snowy lawn. I set the intensity to 100%. I set the speed to maximum. I took a sip of water. My hand hovered over the mouse button. "Let there be light." I clicked. The effect on the monitors was immediate and violent. The elegant warm glow of the crystal chandeliers vanished instantly. In its place, the room erupted into a blinding white strobe. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. It was like being inside a lightning storm that wouldn't end. The frame rate of my security cameras struggled to keep up, creating a jagged, ghostly image on my screens. I saw guests throw their hands up to shield their eyes. I saw a waiter drop a tray of champagne flutes. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor, but in the strobe light, it looked like diamonds exploding in slow motion. People were stumbling. The stroboscopic effect destroys depth perception. Simple tasks like walking or putting down a glass become difficult. I saw Sterling Vance grab the back of a sofa to steady himself. He looked terrified. This was not a power outage. This was an assault. Courtney was screaming something, but I couldn't hear her yet. She was looking up at the ceiling as if she could yell the lights back to normal. She looked demonic in the flashing light, her face contorted in rage and panic, appearing in brief, jerky glimpses. It was chaos. Beautiful, organized chaos. The veneer of sophistication was gone. They looked like rats trapped in a box. The visual assault was complete. The thermal assault was underway. Now it was time for the narrative assault. The guests were disoriented. They were cold. They were scared. They were ready to listen. I opened the audio server. The house had a Sonos system with architectural speakers embedded in the ceilings of every room. Currently, it was playing a loop of generic classical music intended to make donors feel sophisticated. I muted the music. The silence that followed the strobing lights was heavy. The guests paused, waiting. They thought perhaps the power had cut and the lights would stabilize. They were wrong. I loaded the file I had prepared. It was named Truth Serum W-Wave. It was a compilation of audio clips I had harvested from the security system over the last 3 days. It was the greatest hits of my family's treachery. I set the volume to master level. That meant every speaker in the house, inside and out, would play at maximum volume. I hovered over the play button. This was the moment. This was the end of the Bright Future Foundation. I pressed play. The sound was deafening. It didn't start with music. It started with the sharp crackle of static, followed by Courtney's voice, clear and amplified. "The old man needs to die, Tyson. We cannot wait 5 years. We need that money now." The guests froze. In the flashing light, they looked like statues. Courtney's voice boomed again, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "He is a useless old relic. Just get him to sign the papers and we can dump him in a state home. I don't care if he rots." I watched Courtney on the screen. She stopped moving. She stood in the center of the room, her mouth open, her eyes wide with horror. She recognized her own voice. She recognized the words she had spoken in the privacy of her bedroom, thinking she was safe. The audio continued. Now it was Tyson's voice, whiny and weak. "But Dad will know. He checks the accounts." And then Beatrice's voice, shrill and cruel. "Who cares what Langston thinks? It is my money too. I earned it by putting up with him for 40 years. The room was paralyzed. The investors who had just written checks were listening to the people they had trusted plotting the demise of the man they were honoring. It was raw. It was ugly. It was the truth broadcast at 100 decibels. I watched Robert LeClaire. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the check he had written. He looked at it, and then he ripped it in half. He dropped the pieces on the floor. He turned to look at Courtney. His expression was not one of confusion. It was one of absolute disgust. The strobe lights flashed, the voices screamed from the ceiling, and the cold wind blew through the vents. The party was over. The nightmare had begun. And I was just getting started. The strobe lights continued their relentless assault, slicing the room into jagged frames of panic and confusion. I sat in my study 400 miles away and watched the social fabric of the gala disintegrate in real time. The audio recording of my family plotting my death had faded, but the echo of their treachery hung in the freezing air like a toxic mist. The guests were no longer donors. They were victims realizing they had been locked in a room with predators. Robert LeClaire was the first to move. He did not walk. He marched. He cut a path through the crowd, his face a mask of fury that transcended the disorientation of the flashing lights. He walked straight up to Courtney, who was standing near the fireplace, trembling in her silver gown. "Give it back," he shouted. His voice cracked over the sound of the wind howling through the open vents. "Give me the check, now." Courtney tried to smile. It was a grotesque expression. "Robert, please," she stammered, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "It is a technical glitch. Someone hacked the system. That recording was fake. It was AI generated. We are being targeted by cyber terrorists." It was a desperate lie born of the modern age, but Robert LeClaire was a man who built skyscrapers. He knew the difference between a structural failure and a demolition. "Do not lie to me," he roared. He grabbed her arm. It was a violation of social etiquette that showed just how far the situation had deteriorated. "I heard your voice. I heard you say you wanted him to rot. Give me my money." He reached for the stack of checks she had placed on the mantel. Courtney shrieked and threw her body over them, protecting the paper with the ferocity of a mother protecting a child. Only her child was greed. "No," she screamed. "This is for the foundation. You signed it. It is a binding contract." The mood in the room shifted from confusion to hostility. The other guests saw Robert make his move. The herd instinct took over. Suddenly, everyone wanted their money back. Sterling Vance pushed through the crowd. The local politicians who had been drinking my wine started checking their pockets for their own donations. It was a run on the bank. They surged toward the fireplace. Beatrice tried to intervene. She stepped in front of Courtney, her diamond necklace flashing under the strobes. Please, everyone calm down, she yelled, trying to summon the authority of the lady of the manor. This is a misunderstanding. We are the victims here. Get out of the way, Beatrice, a woman shouted. You are a fraud. We heard you. You said you earned the money by putting up with him. You are disgusting. The wall of social polite society crumbled. A man in a velvet jacket reached past Beatrice and grabbed a handful of envelopes from the table. Courtney clawed at him. He shoved her back. She stumbled in her high heels and fell hard onto the hearth. She scrambled up, not to check for injuries, but to run to the front door. She threw her back against the heavy oak wood, spreading her arms wide. Nobody leaves, she screamed. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room in the stroboscopic light. The roads are icy. It is dangerous. We have to wait for the technical difficulties to be resolved. You cannot leave with the donations. She was trying to hold them hostage. She thought she could contain the truth by locking it inside the house. Robert Leclerc did not hesitate. He walked up to her. He was a large man. He looked down at my daughter-in-law, who was shivering from the cold and the adrenaline. Move, he said, or I will move you. Courtney looked at Tyson for help. Tyson was cowering behind the bar, holding a bottle of vodka like a weapon. He did not move. He did not defend his wife. He let her stand alone against the mob. Robert grabbed the handle of the door. Courtney tried to hold it shut. It was a pathetic struggle. He ripped her hands away and threw the door open. The winter wind blasted into the hallway, carrying snow and the biting reality of the night. Get out, Robert yelled to the other guests. Everyone get out before these grifters try to steal your coats, too. The exodus began. It was chaotic. People were slipping on the floor, pushing each other, grabbing their furs from the overwhelmed coat check girl. I watched it all with the clinical detachment of an auditor watching a failed business liquidate its assets. They were fleeing the scene of the crime, and they were taking their checkbooks with them. Courtney stood by the open door, tears streaming down her face, watching her fortune drive away into the snow. She screamed into the night, "Come back. You promised. We have a contract, but contracts require consideration and good faith." And tonight, there was neither. I leaned back in my chair. The physical evacuation was underway, but I needed to ensure the reputational destruction was total. I looked at my email client. It had been 2 hours since I sent the tip to Marcus Thorne in Toronto. The timing was perfect. I saw a man named Harrison, who I knew was a close associate of the Toronto banking elite, pull his phone out of his pocket. He stopped near the door. He frowned. He swiped across his screen. Then he looked up. He looked directly at Beatrice, who was standing by the stairs clutching a bottle of wine. Harrison held his phone up. "Did anyone else get this alert?" He shouted over the wind. The room went quiet. The few stragglers stopped. "It is from Marcus Thorne," Harrison said. "He says the Bright Future Foundation is under investigation by the RCMP for money laundering. He says the honorary chairman Langston Hayes has filed a formal complaint for identity theft against his own son." The rumor hit the room like a physical shockwave. It was one thing to hear a recording that could be dismissed as a prank or a hack. It was another thing entirely to have a confirmed report from the most feared financial journalist in Canada. "Let me see that," Sterling Vance demanded, grabbing Harrison's phone. He read the screen. His face went pale. "It says here they are funneling money to the Cayman Islands. It says the board of directors is a sham." He looked at Tyson. Tyson dropped the vodka bottle. It shattered on the floor. "Is this true?" Sterling asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "Did you launder my donation from last year?" Tyson stammered. "No, it is complicated. It is a tax strategy. It is a crime." Sterling roared. He pulled out his phone. "I am calling my lawyer. I am calling the district attorney." Across the room, phones began to light up. The digital virus I had planted was spreading. The news was traveling through the group chats and the signal threads of the elite. "Did you see the attachment?" a woman asked. "It is a tax return. They claimed $40,000 in income." "Look at this one," another man said. "It is an invoice for a leased Range Rover paid for by the scholarship fund." They were dissecting the evidence right there in my living room. They were doing the audit for me. Beatrice looked around, her eyes wide with terror. She realized suddenly that this was not just a bad party. This was the end of her social life. This was the end of her standing in the community. She was no longer the long-suffering wife of a difficult man. She was the matriarch of a crime family. She tried to retreat up the stairs. "Where are you going?" Beatrice Harrison yelled. "You are not going anywhere. The police are on their way. The article says the FBI has been notified." Beatrice froze on the stairs. She looked like a deer in the headlights, literally, as the strobe lights continued to flash. I watched Courtney. She was slumped against the wall near the door. She was checking her own phone. She must have seen the article. She must have seen the comments accumulating on the social media feeds. Her name was trending in the worst possible way. She looked at Tyson. Her eyes were full of hate. "Fix this," she hissed. "You said your father was stupid. You said he wouldn't notice." Tyson looked at her. He looked at the angry mob. He looked at the shattered glass. And then he did the only thing he knew how to do. He tried to call for help. I watched Tyson pull his phone from his pocket. He was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He tapped the screen furiously. He held it to his ear. He pulled it away. He tapped it again. He was trying to call his lawyer, or perhaps the tech support for the smart home system. Or maybe he was trying to transfer the money out of the foundation account before it was frozen. It didn't matter what he was trying to do, because he couldn't do it. I opened the network administration panel on my third monitor. I had installed an enterprise-grade firewall on the property years ago. It gave me granular control over every device connected to the network. I had identified the MAC addresses of Tyson's phone, Courtney's phone, and Beatrice's tablet days ago. 10 minutes ago, I had moved them into a quarantine group labeled hostile entities. I had blocked their access to the internet. I had blocked their ability to make Wi-Fi calls. And because the cottage was in a valley near the border, cellular reception was spotty at best. The only reliable signal came through the microcell booster I had installed in the attic. I disabled the booster. Tyson was holding a brick. I watched him run to the wall panel, the iPad mounted near the kitchen that controlled the house systems. He was trying to override the lights, trying to stop the strobing, trying to turn the heat back on. He tapped the screen. "Access denied" appeared in big red letters. He tried to enter the passcode. It was his birthday. I had changed it yesterday to the date of the day I fired him from his internship 5 years ago. He tried again. "System lockout." He screamed in frustration and punched the wall next to the panel. "Why is nothing working?" he yelled. He looked at the router blinking in the corner of the room. He ran over to it. He unplugged it and plugged it back in. The classic move of the incompetent. It rebooted. The lights turned green. He thought he had fixed it. He looked at his phone. Still no signal. He didn't understand that the router was working perfectly. It was simply refusing to speak to him because I had told it to ignore him. Courtney ran over to him. "Call the police," she said. "We need to get these people out of here. They are going to hurt us." "I can't," Tyson yelled. "The phone is dead. The internet is down. Dad must have forgotten to pay the bill." Forgotten. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was incompetence. He couldn't conceive of the idea that this was a targeted strike. "Try your phone," he told Courtney. She pulled hers out. "No service. Nothing. We are trapped." She looked out the window. The snow was falling heavily now, a white curtain isolating them from the world. The last of the guests were driving away their taillights, disappearing into the storm. Tyson, Courtney, and Beatrice were alone in the freezing strobe-lit house. They were cut off from their bank accounts. They were cut off from the internet. They were cut off from help. They were in a digital prison of my design. I watched Beatrice sit down on the stairs. She wrapped her fur coat tighter around herself. "Langston," she whispered. It wasn't a scream this time, it was a realization. "Langston is doing this." Tyson stopped pacing. He looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. The red light was blinking steady and unblinking. He walked over to it. He stood directly under it. He looked up into the lens. "Dad," he said. His voice was small, lost. "Dad, if you can hear me, please. Stop. It is cold. We are scared." I leaned into my microphone in my study. I pressed the talk button. My voice would travel 400 miles over the secure fiber line I had kept active for myself. It would emerge from the hidden speakers in the living room, not booming this time, but quiet, intimate. "I am not your dad right now, Tyson," I said. "I am the landlord, and you are late on the rent." Tyson jumped back as if the camera had bitten him. I released the button. I checked the time. It was 11:30 p.m. The police had the evidence. The guests had the truth. The family had the fear. There was only one thing left to do. I needed to wait for the knock on the door. I poured myself a glass of water. I watched them huddle together on the sofa, shivering under the flashing lights, waiting for a dawn that would bring them nothing but handcuffs. The silence in my study was absolute. But on the screen, the chaos was internal now. They were not fighting me anymore. They were fighting the realization that their lives were over. And I was the one who had signed the termination papers. The digital numbers on my desk clock flipped silently from 11:59 to 12:00. It was officially Christmas morning. In homes across America, fathers were assembling bicycles and mothers were stuffing stockings. But in my study, the only gift being prepared was an indictment. I sat in the darkness, illuminated only by the blue glow of my bank of monitors. The house was quiet. It was the kind of silence you find in a vault. I had not moved from my leather chair in 4 hours. My body was stiff, but my mind was vibrating with a frequency that felt like electricity. On the screen, the chaos at the cottage had settled into a grim tableau of misery. My family was huddled on the living room floor, wrapped in curtains and tablecloths, trying to conserve body heat against the 60-degree chill I had engineered. The strobe lights continued their rhythmic assault, pulsing like a migraine. They looked broken. They looked defeated. But I knew better. Rats are most dangerous when they are cornered. And my son and his wife were cornered rats who had just realized the trapdoor was sealed. I watched Tyson holding his phone. He had been staring at it for hours, praying for a signal. I had granted him a small mercy 5 minutes ago. I had re-enabled the cellular booster in the attic just enough to allow data to trickle in. I did not do it out of kindness. I did it because news travels fast on the internet and I wanted them to see the headlines before the handcuffs went on. I wanted them to know exactly why their lives were ending. I waited. I watched Tyson's face on the high-definition feed. I saw his eyes widen. I saw the color drain from his cheeks until he looked like a ghost. He tapped the screen frantically. He showed it to Courtney. She snatched it from his hand. Her mouth fell open. She screamed something I could not hear because I had muted the audio to savor the visual panic. Then my personal cell phone lit up on the desk. I looked at the time. It was exactly 12:12 a.m. I picked up the phone. The caller ID read Tyson Hayes. I did not answer immediately. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder if I was asleep or dead or simply ignoring him. On the 4th ring, I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not say Merry Christmas. I simply breathed into the line and waited. "Dad, is that you?" Tyson's voice was a high-pitched shriek that clawed at my eardrum. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. "Dad, answer me. I know you are there." "I am here, Tyson," I said. My voice was low and steady. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a captain his ship was being seized by customs. "Dad, what the hell is going on? I just got a notification. The CBC News app. It pushed an alert to my phone. Dad, your name is in the headline." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. "Is it?" I asked. "What does it say?" "You know what it says?" he screamed. He was hysterical now. "It says Langston Hayes, logistics magnate, exposes cross-border charity fraud ring run by family. It says there is an active investigation involving the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Dad, it names me. It names Courtney. It says we are laundering money." I took a sip of water. The glass was cool in my hand. "Well, Tyson," I said, "are you?" There was a choking sound on the other end of the line. "Dad, stop it. This isn't funny. You have to call them. You have to call the paper. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you didn't send those files. They have tax returns, Dad. They have the Cayman account numbers. How do they have that?" "I gathered the data, Tyson," I said. "I audited you. Did you think I wouldn't notice $100,000 moving through my own network? Did you think I was too old to read a spreadsheet?" I heard a scuffle on the line. The phone was being wrestled away. Then Courtney's voice pierced my ear. It was not fearful like Tyson's. It was venomous. It was the sound of a woman who realizes she has lost the game and decides to burn the board. "You senile old bastard," she hissed. "You think you are smart. You think this proves anything. I will ruin you. I will tell everyone you are crazy. I will tell them you fabricated this because you are jealous of your son. No one will believe you. You are just a sad, lonely old man sitting in a big, empty house." I looked at her on the monitor. She was standing in the middle of my living room, shivering in her silver dress, her hair a mess, her eyes wild. She looked small. She looked insignificant. "You can tell them whatever you want, Courtney," I said, "but you will have to do it from a holding cell." "You can't do this to us," she screamed. "We are your family. We are the only people who care about you. If you send us to jail, you will die alone. Do you hear me, Langston? You will rot in that house and no one will find you for weeks." I listened to her threats. They washed over me like water over a rock. She was trying to leverage a fear I did not have. I was not afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being a fool. and tonight I had proven I was neither. "Put Tyson back on the phone," I said. "No," she yelled. "You don't get to talk to him. He is my husband. Put him on Courtney, or I will disconnect the call and you can explain your side of the story to the SWAT team that is currently turning onto Lakeview Drive." There was a pause. Then I heard the phone being shoved back at Tyson. "Dad," he whimpered. "Dad, please. We can fix this. I will pay it back, I swear. I will work. I will do anything. Just call them off. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a drill. It is too late for that, son," I said. "The supply chain has been disrupted. The cargo has been seized." "Dad, why are you doing this?" he sobbed. "You are supposed to protect us. Mom said you were just being difficult. She said you were just grumpy. Why did you have to go nuclear?" I closed my eyes for a brief second. The image of the little boy I taught to ride a bike flashed in my mind. But then I opened them and saw the man who had forged my signature and planned my commitment to a state facility. "I am not difficult, Tyson," I said. My voice was ice. "I am not grumpy, and I am not senile." I paused. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to remember this moment for the next 10 years he spent in a federal penitentiary. "You broke the contract, son. You stole from the hand that fed you. You plotted against the mind that taught you. You mistook my silence for weakness and my generosity for stupidity." "Dad, please," he begged. "I am not your father right now," I said. "I am the consequences of your actions. I am the audit you never thought would come. I am justice." I looked at the monitor. Through the front window of the cottage I could see blue and red lights flashing against the snow. They were silent on the screen, but I knew they were deafening in reality. "Do you hear that sound, Tyson?" I asked. "What sound?" he whispered. "The siren's son. The cavalry has arrived, but they are not here to save you." On the screen I saw the front door of the cottage burst open. I saw men in tactical gear swarm into the foyer. I saw the red laser sights sweeping across the room. Tyson dropped the phone. I heard it hit the floor. I heard him scream. I heard Courtney shrieking. I heard the commanding voice of a federal agent shouting for everyone to get on the ground. I listened for 10 more seconds. I listened to the sound of my family being dismantled. I listened to the end of the Bright Future Foundation. Then I reached out and pressed the red button on my phone. Click. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my study. The clock read 12:20 a.m. It was Christmas morning, and I had just delivered the most expensive lesson of their lives. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt tired, but it was a good tired. It was the tiredness of a job finished on time and under budget. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark, quiet street. I was alone. There would be no family breakfast in the morning. There would be no gifts under the tree. But my bank accounts were secure, my name was cleared, and the parasites had been removed. "Merry Christmas, Langston," I said to myself. I turned off the lights in the study and walked upstairs to my bedroom. I was going to sleep like a baby. The monitors in my study offered a silent, high-definition window into the end of my family. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the desktop, watching the tactical team breach the perimeter of the cottage. It was not a chaotic entry. It was a precision operation executed with the kind of logistical efficiency I had spent my career admiring. The front door did not open. It disintegrated under the force of a battering ram. Wood splinters flew into the foyer, creating a cloud of dust that swirled in the strobe lights I had activated hours ago. Uniformed agents poured into the hallway. Their movements were sharp and practiced. I saw the bold yellow letters on their tactical vests, FBI. Following them were the darker uniforms of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It was a joint task force, a multi-jurisdictional response to a cross-border crime. I had not just called the police, I had summoned an international incident. Inside the living room, the reaction was instant panic. On my screen, I saw Courtney try to run toward the kitchen, presumably to destroy documents or hide the cash she had stolen. She did not make it 3 steps. An agent moved into her path. She screamed something I could not hear because I had muted the audio again, but her body language was feral. She tried to strike the agent. It was a mistake. The agent spun her around. He swept her legs. She hit the hardwood floor hard. It was a jarring impact. I watched as he pulled her arms behind her back. The silver dress she had bought to impress the Toronto elite was now bunched up around her waist, exposing her legs as she kicked futilely against the floor. Tyson did not run. He froze. He stood near the fireplace, his eyes wide, his hands half raised in a gesture of surrender that looked more like a plea for mercy. He was staring at the door, staring at the men with guns, staring at the reality crashing into his fantasy world. I watched the red laser sights sweep across the room, cutting through the darkness and the flashing white light. They danced over the cheap vinyl banner. They danced over the expensive furniture. And then they settled on the chests of my son and his wife. The raid was violent, it was loud, it was terrifying, and I had orchestrated every second of it. I felt no guilt, I felt no remorse. I felt only the cold satisfaction of an auditor who has finally balanced a ledger that had been in the red for too long. They had invited the world into my home to defraud them. Now the world had come to collect. The camera angle shifted as an agent bumped into the tripod stand near the bar. The view centered on the middle of the room where the humiliation was becoming total. Courtney was pinned to the ground. An agent had his knee on her back. The woman who had sneered at me across the breakfast table, the woman who had called me difficult and senile, was now eating dust. Her face was pressed against the floorboards. Her hair was a tangled mess. She was shouting spitting threats that no longer carried any weight. She was not the president of a foundation anymore. She was suspect number one. But it was Tyson who drew my attention. My son, the boy I had taught to tie a tie, the man who thought he could outsmart me. He was pressed against the wall by a burly agent. His hands were being cuffed behind his back. The agent was shouting instructions. "Spread your legs. Stop moving." And then I saw it. A dark stain began to spread across the front of Tyson's expensive tailored trousers. It started at the crotch and expanded rapidly down his leg. He had wet himself. I zoomed in. There was no mistake. In the terror of the moment, facing the consequences of his own greed, my son had lost control of his bladder. He was crying. I could see his shoulders shaking. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked like a child who had realized the monsters under the bed were real. It was pathetic. It was visceral. It was the physical manifestation of his weakness. He had wanted to play the big man. He had wanted to play the international financier. But when the pressure was applied, he didn't diamond. He liquefied. I took a sip of water. I watched him being spun around. The agent noticed the stain. I saw the look of disgust on the man's face. He handled Tyson with even less care, now pushing him roughly toward the center of the room to join his wife. They were side by side on the floor now, Courtney bound and furious, Tyson bound and incontinent. The strobe lights continued to flash above them, illuminating their shame in rhythmic bursts. This was the legacy they had built. This was the bright future they had promised. Agents were already moving through the house. I saw them confiscating laptops. I saw them bagging the cash that Courtney had left on the table. I saw them taking pictures of the banner. They were building the case brick by brick. Every piece of paper, every hard drive, every stolen dollar was being cataloged. I looked at Tyson one more time. He was looking at the camera. He knew I was watching. He knew I was the architect of this moment. His eyes were pleading. He was mouthing the word dad over and over again, but I was not his dad tonight. I was the witness. And witnesses do not intervene. They simply observe and record. In the corner of the room, sitting on the velvet sofa, Beatrice remained untouched by the physical force of the raid, but she was drowning in the psychological shockwave. An agent stood over her asking questions, but she did not seem to hear him. She was not looking at her son lying in his own urine. She was not looking at her daughter-in-law being read her rights. She was looking at the jewelry box on her lap. It was a small velvet box. I knew what was inside. It contained the diamond earrings I had given her when Tyson graduated high school. It contained the sapphire brooch my mother had left her. She was clutching it with white-knuckled desperation, hugging it to her chest as if it were a life preserver in a stormy sea. She was crying. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks, ruining the makeup she had spent hours applying. Her fur coat was draped over her shoulders, but she was shivering violently. I turned up the volume on the microphone near the sofa. I needed to hear what she was saying. Why she sobbed. Why is he doing this? He is evil. He is a monster. She was talking about me. Even now, surrounded by the FBI with her son under arrest for federal crimes, she blamed me. She did not blame her greed. She did not blame her complicity. She blamed the man who had finally said no. He ruined Christmas, she wailed to the agent, who looked bewildered by her reaction. He did this to embarrass us. He is just a bitter old man. Make them stop. Tell Langston to stop this right now. Ma'am, the agent said, his voice calm but firm. Your husband is not here. This is a federal operation. We have a warrant. Please put the box down. No, she screamed. She curled around the box. These are mine. He cannot take these. He takes everything. He controls everything. She was pathetic. She was a woman who had defined her entire existence by what she owned, and now that it was being stripped away, she was hollow. She didn't care that Tyson was going to prison. She cared that her lifestyle was going to prison. I watched as a female agent approached Beatrice. She gently but firmly pried the jewelry box from my wife's fingers. Beatrice shrieked. It was a sound of pure loss. The agent opened the box. She cataloged the contents. Evidence. Potential assets seized under the RICO Act for proceeds of crime. Beatrice slumped back against the sofa. She covered her face with her hands. I hate him, she whispered. I hate him so much. I sat in my study and felt nothing. Her hate was irrelevant. It was the tantrum of a child who has been told to go to bed. I had loved her once. I had built a world for her, but she had burned it down for a party and a lie. The agents began to haul them out. Courtney was first kicking and screaming. Tyson was next shuffling in his wet pants, head hung low. Beatrice was last guided out by the female agent still weeping for her diamonds. The room emptied. The strobe lights continued to flash, illuminating the wreckage of the gala. Shattered glass, overturned chairs, the torn banner. It was over. The house was secure. The criminals were in custody. I reached for the control panel. I turned off the strobe lights. I turned off the audio. The screen went dark and quiet. I stood up. It was time to go to bed. I had a busy morning ahead of me. I had to drive to the police station, not to bail them out, but to deliver the final pieces of the puzzle. Merry Christmas, Beatrice, I said to the dark room. I hope you enjoy the accommodations. I drove my vintage Jaguar into the parking lot of the county precinct at 8 in the morning on Christmas Day. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, the kind that promises sunshine but delivers only biting cold. The streets were empty, save for a few families driving to church and the occasional snowplow clearing the drifts from the night before. I parked in a visitor spot away from the other cars. I stepped out and buttoned my cashmere coat. I checked my reflection in the window. My tie was straight. My shoes were polished. I did not look like a man whose family had just been arrested. I looked like a man arriving for a board meeting where he held 51% of the voting shares. I walked into the station carrying a leather briefcase. It contained the supplementary evidence Sarah O'Malley had compiled overnight, along with 3 documents that would sever the final threads binding me to the people in the holding cells. The sergeant at the desk looked up. He was young, tired, and clearly unhappy to be working the holiday shift. But before he could ask for my identification, the heavy steel door behind him buzzed open. Chief Robert Miller walked out. He was a man I had known for 20 years. We played poker on the first Friday of every month. He knew my handicap, and I knew about his daughter's tuition payments. He looked tired, but when he saw me, he straightened up and extended a hand. Langston, he said. His grip was firm. I am sorry we had to meet like this on a holiday. I shook his hand. It is necessary work, Bob. How are they? They are processing, he said. The feds have taken jurisdiction over Tyson and Courtney because of the wire fraud and the interstate nature of the crimes. They are being transported to the federal detention center in Albany this afternoon. But Beatrice, she is still here. She is not facing federal charges yet, just state charges for conspiracy and possession of stolen property. I nodded. Can I see her? Miller hesitated. It is highly irregular, Langston. She has been asking for a lawyer. She has been screaming your name for 6 hours. I am not here to console her, Bob, I said. I am here to deliver legal notice. It is a civil matter that intersects with the criminal one. My lawyer arranged it with the district attorney. It will only take 10 minutes. Miller studied my face. He was looking for cracks. He was looking for the grieving husband. He found only the auditor. Okay, he said, but I am keeping an officer in the room for your protection. I followed him through the buzzing doors down the linoleum hallway that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. We passed the interrogation rooms. I heard a woman crying in one of them. It sounded like Courtney. I did not stop. We reached the visitor room at the end of the hall. Miller opened the door and nodded to the officer standing inside. Then he stepped back. Good luck, Langston, he said. I walked in. Beatrice was sitting at a metal table handcuffed to a steel loop bolted to the floor. The transformation was total. The woman who had held court at the gala 12 hours ago, draped in furs and diamonds, was gone. In her place sat a disheveled elderly woman in a wrinkled cocktail dress that smelled of stale smoke and sweat. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet, was flat and oily. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were red and swollen. For a moment I saw hope flare in them. She thought I was the cavalry. She thought I had come to write the check that would make the bad men go away. "Langston," she gasped. "Oh, thank God. You came. Get me out of here. This is a mistake. A terrible mistake. These people treated me like a criminal. They took my necklace. They took my rings." I sat down in the chair opposite her. I placed my briefcase on the table. I folded my hands. "They took the evidence, Beatrice," I said. "Those items were purchased with funds obtained through fraud. They are not your rings. They are the bank's rings." Her face crumpled. She reached out with her free hand, trying to touch me, but the chain on the cuffs was too short. "Langston, stop it," she pleaded. "This has gone too far. You made your point. You scared us." "Okay, we get it. We were wrong. We should have invited you. We should have listened to you. But prison, Langston, prison is for bad people. It is not for us." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 40 years. I looked for the woman I married, but she wasn't there. She had been consumed years ago by the woman who needed to impress strangers. "You are bad people, Beatrice," I said. My voice was level, devoid of anger. "Good people do not plot to have their husbands declared incompetent. Good people do not stand by while their son embezzles money. Good people do not steal from charity." She recoiled as if I had slapped her. "We did it for the family," she hissed. Her tone shifted instantly from begging to accusing. "We did it because you are so tight. You sit on millions, Langston, and you give us an allowance like we are children. We needed that money. Tyson needed it. He was drowning, and you wouldn't help him." "I helped him every day of his life," I said. "I gave him an education. I gave him a debt-free start. I gave him contacts. He chose to gamble. He chose to be lazy. And you chose to enable him because you liked the lifestyle he pretended to have." "You are a monster," she spat. "You are sitting there in your expensive coat, judging us. You have no heart. You never did. You are just a calculator in a suit. That is why I cheated on the expenses. That is why I helped them. Because I deserved more than living with a cold fish." There it was, the truth. It bubbled up from the bottom of the well. She didn't love me. She tolerated me because I paid the bills. And when I threatened to stop paying the bills, she decided to liquidate me. "I deserved it," she screamed. "I put up with your long hours. I put up with your boring stories about shipping lanes. I earned every penny I tried to take." I nodded slowly. "I earned it." That was exactly what she had said on the recording I played at the party. "I am glad you feel that way, Beatrice," I said, "because it makes what I am about to do much easier." I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a thick blue folder. I slid it across the metal table. "What is this?" she asked, looking at it with suspicion. "That is a petition for divorce," I said, "citing irreconcilable differences, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm." She laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You cannot divorce me, Langston. We have been married 40 years. I get half of everything. The house, the accounts, the pension. You think you can leave me with nothing, but you are wrong. The law protects wives." I reached into the briefcase again. I pulled out a single sheet of yellowed paper inside a protective plastic sleeve. I placed it on top of the divorce papers. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. She squinted at it. It was a document dated 40 years ago, signed in blue ink. "That is our prenuptial agreement," I said. She scoffed. "That old thing, it expired years ago, or a judge will throw it out. It is ancient. Read Clause 7. "Beatrice," I said. She leaned in. Her lips moved as she read the legal text. Clause 7. "In the event that either party is convicted of or admits to a felony crime against the estate of the other party, including but not limited to fraud, embezzlement, or theft, all claims to marital assets are immediately forfeited, and the offending party shall receive 0 spousal support." She stopped reading. She looked up. Her face was the color of ash. "You admitted to it," I said. "On tape. To the FBI. And just now to me. You admitted you felt entitled to steal because you put up with me. That is a confession, Beatrice." She shook her head violently. No, that won't hold up." "It will hold up," I said. "Sarah O'Malley drafted it, and she is currently the one filing it with the court." Beatrice started to hyperventilate. But where will I go? The house, the cottage. I pulled out the third document. It was an eviction notice. The cottage is owned by a trust, I said. You are not a beneficiary. My primary residence is in my name alone, purchased before our marriage. You have been served, Beatrice. You are evicted from both properties effective immediately. Your personal effects will be boxed and placed in storage for 30 days. After that, they will be auctioned to pay your legal fees. She stared at the papers. The reality was crashing down on her like a collapsing building. She was 65 years old. She had no job. She had no skills. She had no money. She had no husband. And she was about to have a criminal record. "Langston, please," she whispered. Her voice was small, broken. "Please, I am old. I am scared. Don't do this. Just help me with the lawyer. Just let me come home. I will change, I promise. I will be the wife you wanted." I stood up. I buttoned my coat. I looked down at her. I felt a flicker of pity. It was the same pity you feel for a dog that has been hit by a car. But I did not feel love. Love requires trust, and she had murdered trust in cold blood. "You cannot come home, Beatrice," I said, "because you burned it down. You lit the match when you decided I was worth more dead than alive." I turned toward the door. "Langston," she screamed. "Langston, come back. You can't leave me here. It is Christmas." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I did not look back. "I know it is Christmas," I said. "And this is my gift to myself, the gift of silence." I walked out. The door buzzed shut behind me, cutting off her screams. I walked back down the hallway. I shook hands with Chief Miller. "Are you okay, Langston?" he asked. "I am fine, Bob," I said. "I just took out the trash." I walked out into the cold, bright morning. The sun was shining on the snow. The air filled my lungs. I felt lighter. I felt younger. I got into my Jaguar and started the engine. I had one more stop to make before I went back to the empty house. I was going to drive to the border. I was going to the cottage. I needed to change the locks one last time. And then I was going to sit by the lake and watch the water freeze. I was alone. But for the first time in 40 years, I was not lonely. I was free. The federal courthouse in Albany was sweltering in the July heat, but inside courtroom 4, the air was conditioned to a sterile chill. I sat in the witness stand wearing a navy blue suit that was tailored to perfection. I adjusted my silk tie. I looked at the jury, I looked at the judge, and then I looked at the defense table. Tyson and Courtney were sitting there. They were wearing orange jumpsuits. The arrogance that had fueled their Christmas Eve gala was gone, replaced by the hollowed-out look of people who have spent 6 months in federal detention. The trial had been a formality. The evidence I provided was irrefutable. The forensic accounting was precise. The audio recordings were damning. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked overworked, tried to paint me as a tyrannical father who drove his children to desperation. "Mr. Hayes," he asked me during cross-examination, "do you love your son?" I looked at Tyson. He was looking at his hands. He had lost 20 pounds. He looked like a stranger. "I love the potential of my son," I replied. My voice did not waver. I loved the opportunity I gave him. "But I do not love criminals, and I do not finance terrorists, even domestic ones." The jury shifted in their seats. The lawyer had no follow-up question. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge, a woman with eyes as hard as flint, read the verdict. She called their actions a grotesque abuse of trust and a sophisticated financial crime. She sentenced Tyson first. 10 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He did not cry. He just slumped forward, his forehead touching the table. He accepted his fate with the resignation of a man who knows the audit is final. Then came Courtney. The judge looked at her with particular disdain. She recognized Courtney as the architect, the driving force behind the scheme. She saw the manipulation. She saw the malice. 15 years, the judge said, for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Courtney screamed. It was a sharp animal sound. She was dragged out of the courtroom by the marshals, kicking and spitting, cursing my name until the heavy doors slammed shut. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I did not look back at Tyson as they led him away in chains. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding summer sun. My lawyer, Sarah O'Malley, was waiting for me on the steps. "It is done," she said. "It is done," I agreed. "The ledger is balanced." I did not go home to weep. I did not go to a bar to drink. I went to my office. I had work to do. I had to liquidate the assets of the Bright Future Foundation and return the stolen money to the donors. It would take months, but I would ensure every cent was accounted for. I did not feel sadness. I felt the satisfaction of a project manager who has successfully decommissioned a faulty asset. The supply chain was clean. The risk had been eliminated. 3 weeks later, I made a stop at a discount supermarket on the south side of the city. I did not usually shop there. I preferred the specialty grocer near my home. But today I had a specific errand. I needed to verify the status of a former dependent. I walked through the automatic doors. The air smelled of floor wax and cheap produce. I picked up a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. I walked to register 4. The woman behind the counter was wearing a blue smock with a name tag that was crooked. Her hair was gray roots showing through a faded dye job. Her hands, once manicured and soft, were dry and shaking as she scanned a bag of frozen peas for the customer ahead of me. It was Beatrice. She looked 20 years older. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. The prenuptial agreement had held up in court just as Sarah predicted. Because she had admitted to being an accomplice to the fraud, she received nothing. No alimony, no house, no pension share. She had left the marriage with the clothes in her closet and a used sedan I allowed her to keep out of pity. She finished with the customer. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. She froze. The scanner beeped in her hand. "Hello, Beatrice," I said. She stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked at my suit. She looked at my watch. She looked at the life she used to have standing right in front of her. "Are you here to gloat?" she whispered. Her voice was raspy. "I am here to buy milk," I said. I placed the items on the belt. She scanned them. Her hands were trembling so badly she dropped the bread. She picked it up. She did not look me in the eye again. "That will be $5.50, she said to the register. I handed her a $20 bill. "Keep the change," I said. She took the money. She put it in the drawer. She did not say thank you. "You ruined me," she hissed as I picked up my bag. "You took everything. I am living in a studio apartment above a garage. I have to work standing up for 8 hours a day. My legs hurt. I am 65 years old, Langston. How could you do this?" I looked at her. I saw the woman who had demanded $5,000 of wine while plotting to put me in a home. "I did not do this, Beatrice," I said. "You did. You breached the contract. You tried to liquidate the primary asset. This is just the market correction." I turned and walked away. I did not feel guilt. I felt clarity. She was exactly where she belonged. She was earning her living for the first time in her life. It was a late lesson, but a necessary one. I drove north. I left the city behind. I drove toward the border, toward the cool air and the deep water. The cottage looked different in the summer. The snow was gone, replaced by lush green lawns and flower beds I had replanted myself. The banner was gone. The furniture was back in its rightful place. The house was no longer a crime scene. It was a home again. I walked out onto the large deck overlooking the lake. The grill was hot. The smell of charcoal and marinated steak filled the air. I was not alone. Sitting around the large outdoor table were 6 young men and women. They were dressed in casual clothes, laughing, talking, debating. They were the first recipients of the Hayes Logistics Scholarship. I had taken the money I saved from cutting off Tyson and Beatrice, the money I would have spent on legal fees for my own defense, and I had invested it. I invested it in the future. These students were brilliant. They were hungry. They came from backgrounds where nothing was given and everything was earned. They reminded me of myself 40 years ago. I walked over to the grill. I flipped the steaks with precision. "Mr. Hayes," one of the students called out. A young man named Marcus who was studying supply chain management at Cornell. "We were just talking about the case study you sent us, the one about the shipping container fraud in Singapore." "What did you conclude, Marcus?" I asked. "That you always have to check the weight manifest against the volume," he said. "If the numbers do not match, you stop the ship." I smiled. "Exactly. You stop the ship. You do not hope it gets better. You do not ignore the data because you like the captain. You stop the ship." I plated the steaks. We sat down to eat. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. The conversation was stimulating. It was respectful. It was real. These young people did not want my money for Ferraris. They wanted it for tuition. They wanted an opportunity. They respected me not because they had to, but because I had knowledge they wanted. I raised my glass of wine. It was a vintage Cabernet, the kind Beatrice would have chugged without tasting. To standards, I said. The students raised their glasses of iced tea and soda. To standards. I took a sip. I looked out at the water. My wife had called me difficult. My son had called me grumpy. My daughter-in-law had called me senile. They were wrong. I was not difficult. I was discerning. I had standards. And for too long I had lowered those standards for the people who shared my last name. I had corrected that error. I looked at the empty chairs where Tyson and Beatrice used to sit. I did not miss them. I missed the idea of them, but the reality was a liability I could no longer afford. The silence of the lake was perfect. The laughter of the students was genuine. My bank accounts were secure. My legacy was sitting at this table, not rotting in a prison cell. I took a breath of the clean, cool air. I was Langston Hayes. I was 68 years old, and I was just getting started. The final adjustment was complete. The books were balanced, and the profit margin was peace. I spent 40 years mastering the logistics of global trade, but it took a single Christmas to master the logistics of self-respect. I learned that silence is never surrender. It is the gathering of data before the strike. My family mistook my generosity for obligation and my patience for weakness. That was their fatal calculation. You cannot build a legacy on a foundation of entitlement, and you cannot buy loyalty with a checkbook. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people freeze in the cold reality of their own choices. A difficult man is simply a man who knows his worth and refuses to discount it. If you believe that respect is non-negotiable and justice is a dish best served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the Ledger.